watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hey, welcome to the Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. I'm Eli Price, here today on episode 25 of the podcast, getting closer and closer to the end of our Christopher Nolan series, going through all the films of Christopher Nolan, and we do deep dives, and so that's what we've been doing. But I'm here with Sam Camp today to talk Interstellar. Sam, how are you doing today?
Doing good. A little under the weather. I think you are as well, but hanging in there. So I think there's a light at the end of this sick tunnel.
I'm at the stage where there's just kind of the stuff back in the back of your sinuses. Yeah. And so I'm waiting for that to make its way out. And hopefully our voices hold up for this talk. Maybe we won't maybe it won't be as massive of a podcast as Interstellar is a movie. So
yeah. We'll try and be brief.
Yeah. I'm excited to dig into Interstellar. Sam has been with us before. I believe he joined us for the Darjeeling Limited episode, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Back in our
Happy
West series. But Sam works. He's over in the great state of Georgia, which is where I'm from, and that's where I met Sam. But he's works with Blackaby Ministries and the Collision, which is the Collision is kind of part of a branch of Blackaby Ministries, if I'm not mistaken.
It is.
The Collision kind of about Christianity and culture and the collision where they meet. Working over there with Daniel Blackaby. So do you have any news of what y'all have been up to over at the Collision?
We've been reviewing a lot of interesting shows lately. By we, I mean Daniel. I mostly just filmed them and issue snide remarks from behind the camera that I edit out later. But it's been good. We've talked to some interesting people as well. We've had the opportunity to have a few people on who have created shows or movies. Mm-hmm. So that's been kind of interesting to getting to hear from people who've made stuff, especially from a Christian perspective. And
sure,
you can't grill people too much because we usually give Christian movies a pretty hard time in our reviews and stuff. But it's also really cool to just sit down and talk with people who are making some of those and just sort of see where they're coming from. And so that's been really neat, getting to have those opportunities. And it continues to grow pretty steadily. A lot of written content that we do as well. Yeah. And our fourth volume of sort of an anthology that we try and publish every year of kind of articles from the past year, we just put into a book.
Okay.
And we've just wrapped up the production on that, and so hopefully that'll be coming out soon.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll make sure to link the Collision website in the show notes, and maybe the YouTube channel, I think, is where y'all that's where y'all focus, is YouTube, right?
As far as video content goes, it's all of our reviews are typically we film them, and then Daniel also writes just does a written review, and all that's it, like the collision.org, and then it's just our YouTube channel for other collision stuff, and we do we have been doing a weekly live stream. We've taken a few weeks off lately, but just where we kind of digest what's happening in pop culture, and so that's a lot of fun. Yeah, we have a good time.
I've definitely tuned in for some of those, and I've always enjoyed them. So, but yeah, you shared last time kind of your introduction to film and growing to love film more, and so we won't make the listeners listen to that again, but
once is enough, I think. Well, they've endured enough already.
You can go back and listen to that episode for that if you're interested in that. But I did want to ask if you have in your memory banks what your first introduction to Christopher Nolan was.
Well, I was thinking about that, and I think it was The Prestige.
Okay.
Although at the time, I don't think I knew it was Christopher Nolan.
Sure, yeah.
Because I remember seeing it, I guess it must have been close to when it came out. Like, that was that early 2000s?
Yeah, it was like
05?
It was 06, I want to say.
Okay.
It was between Batman Begins and Dark Knight. So 06.
It was after Batman Begins?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Are you rethinking your
now I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe. I guess it must have been Batman Begins then.
Yeah.
For some reason, I was thinking The Prestige was older than the Batman film, but I don't think. Yeah.
Yeah, he had like a film in between. In between.
It must have been Batman Begins.
Yeah.
What was the movie like? What would have been his?
So before Batman Begins was Following, which is a really small indie, low budget film.
Yeah, I wouldn't have seen
probably, that. Yeah. And then Memento was a little bigger, and then Insomnia was his first studio film. It had
it must have been Batman
Al Pacino,
Begins.
Robin Williams.
Yeah, I would say probably Batman Begins then would have been the first.
Did you see that in theaters, or do you remember?
I think so. I think I would have. But it's been so long. I don't.
It's a long time
sure
ago,
I saw
for
it in theaters.
Almost a decade ago, that movie came out now.
Well, it'd have been 20 years.
No, I mean
almost
2 decades.
20 years.
Almost 2 decades is what I mean. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. Like, when you can start remembering things 20 years ago.
Yeah. But yeah.
What about you?
I guess The Prestige shortly after.
Yeah. Well, and I rewatched it actually on. We were recently flying back from Portugal, and I watched The Prestige. It was on one of the selections.
Yeah.
And that's such a good movie.
It's a great rewatch.
Like, it had been so long, and I remember there was like all the Hugh Jackmans in the tanks, but I didn't remember how it all got there. Yeah. And how it all ended, and boy, that's a great film. Like, that is so good. Yeah.
Yeah. Mine was Batman Begins also. I didn't see it in theaters. I remember watching it like I think I got the DVD at Walmart like when I was in high school or something, and threw it on my DVD player in my room when I was in high school. And then The Prestige, I think, and I, again, like you were saying, I didn't realize it was Christopher Nolan, but I remember in college I saw The Prestige, and I was like, who made this movie? It's incredible. Like, I loved The Prestige when I first saw it, which I still do, but I think I loved it even more then. And I think that's, probably one of the movies that made me like, I want to watch more movies by this guy. Like, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I don't even think I remember loving it when I saw it and just being like, that was a trip. But yeah, again, I don't know that I, even at that point, could have told you who Christopher Nolan was.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh, that was a cool movie. I don't know.
Right.
I had never, and I guess now I'm interested in like who, like if I see something that's really moving, I'm like, oh, I want to find out who directed this. And, but that's relatively recent, even,
yeah, sure.
Even for me now, it's like growing up and in college and young adult, it's like, I don't know that I was ever like,
yeah,
I got to know who made this. It was just sort of like, that was amazing. And then kind of on to the next thing. And
right.
I don't know, like I've never like been one to just kind of dig into something, I guess. I mean, sometimes certain things, I guess I do, but I don't know, with films, it's just like, okay, that was really cool. Like that was a great film.
Yeah.
And I don't know, for some reason, I just never really was like, I need to find out who Christopher Nolan is until I guess, I don't know, like maybe Dark Knight, and it's like, oh, everybody's talking about Christopher Nolan, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I like him too.
Yeah.
But yeah, and he is like, I'm a total fanboy now, and it's like, okay, this guy, like he's on a different plane than I think everybody else is, and so it's kind of cool.
Yeah. It's funny. I feel like I kind of really maybe even around the time Interstellar came out, because it came out 2014, and that's the year I moved here to Louisiana. So I've almost been here for a decade now, and I really think that year is when I really started digging deeper into movies, and like looking up who directed something and all that sort of stuff. And so, so this movie year for that Interstellar came out was like a big year as far as like me really getting more into film. But yeah, like probably before that, it was just kind of like, I like these movies and I don't like these movies, and I don't really know who made them, sort of thing. It wasn't really a question in my mind. But yeah, and my wife still, like, I'll like say, oh yeah, so-and-so directed this movie. And she's like, I don't know. You got to stop telling me directors, because I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's, once you're like in that world and that mindset, it's hard to like, go back and remember like, oh yeah, I used to like have no clue what any of this was too. And so I have to like,
it's interesting. Yeah. You sort of, once you start thinking about it, and like, I can get more into like, who the DP is and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, wow, I love what they did with like all this negative fill light. What are they doing? Like it's so dark, and I love that. And, like Sicario with Roger Deakins, like that's just, I think, a real masterclass. And like,
which, by the way, did you know they have a podcast, the Deakins?
No.
It's called Team Deakins, and it's basically they just interview like filmmakers. It's not usually directors. It's usually like other cinematographers or production design or special effects guys.
Oh, cool.
And they just have them on, and they just like interview them about their career, and it's super interesting.
Oh wow, I'm gonna have to I'll have to check that out. I'll write that down.
Yeah, it's a great podcast. I'll have to maybe I'll pull that back out for my recommendation of the week at the end of the episode.
Yeah, for sure.
But anyway, back to I guess like pulling it all the way back around full circle to Interstellar. I for one, just like getting it out of the way, this is my favorite Christopher Nolan movie. I actually already recorded the Dunkirk episode in true Christopher Nolan fashion, recording episodes out of time. And so
it had to be done.
And so when I finished that episode, I was with my guest was her name was Kara. We were talking, and I was like, well, I haven't rewatched Interstellar yet, because it's always between Interstellar and Dunkirk as my favorite Nolan. And so I've flip-flopped over the years. since Dunkirk came out. And so I was like, I guess in Interstellar I'll make my final decision.
Yeah.
And so you're getting the out of time non-chronological look at my my rankings, but Interstellar I think it still is my favorite. Dunkirk right there with it, but like if I had to pick
I'd
one,
say it's I think it's pretty handily the first. My favorite Nolan film, I think.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know, on so many levels it's pretty masterful.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I remember I saw this twice in theaters in 2014. I don't see very many movies twice in theaters. I don't get to see like a ton of movies in theaters, especially now. I was still single at that point, so I was more able to do that sort of thing.
All kinds of time.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely not now. But even then, like I don't really never see a movie twice in theaters, but I had seen it like I think on my own, and then some of my friends were like, "Hey, we're gonna go see Interstellar." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm coming. I want to see it again."
It's funny you mentioned that. Because I feel like I think I saw this one twice as well in theaters.
That's funny. Yeah.
Now that you mention it, like I'm pretty sure I saw it with like two different groups of people. Yeah. And it was like, yeah, it was that good.
Yeah. I even have like a distinct memory of I went to we have 2 theaters in town, and I went to the wrong one and had to I was like maybe 10 minutes late. But luckily I had already seen it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, no big deal. I remember what happens in the first 10 minutes. And so,
yeah.
Yeah, all that to say, I really love this movie. It was really fun, like digging into it. I have, and I've probably mentioned this on most episodes, but I have a couple of resources that I use. The big one is the Nolan Variations, which really details out a lot of Nolan's career and making of these movies. But really, even just like the special features for this one was really fun. Like on the Blu-ray disc or whatever.
Oh yeah.
Just a lot of really fun, cool stuff. There was a one of the only special feature I didn't have time to watch, which really, it didn't have anything necessarily to do specifically with the movie. But I still wanted to watch it. It was like a 40-50 minute special called The Science of Interstellar, and I was like, oh yeah, I want to dig into that sometime.
yeah. No, that sounds right up my alley. So
oh yeah. But yeah, Nolan, this is, I feel like, how I can relate to Nolan maybe the most out of anything, but he always had an interest in sci-fi. And so he talks about how in the summer of 1977, so he would have been, I guess, like 7 years, I think he was born in 70, so he was 7 years old, but he saw Star Wars 7 times that summer, the summer that it came out. And so, which is really like funny that this 7-year-old is like going to the theaters to see Star Wars 7 times.
I know. That also tells you how cheap movies were back then.
Exactly. Yeah.
Unless I don't know, maybe he came from money. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, his parents weren't like rich. They weren't like struggling, but they weren't rich either. They weren't like well-to-do.
But I do feel like the cost of a movie ticket has surpassed the rate of inflation.
Oh yeah,
many times over. So
yeah, so he was obviously like obsessed with Star Wars. He talks about how like he was at 7 years old. He was actually like already interested in like how they made it, and he was like getting these he would find like magazines where they were like they would show like about how the movie was made and stuff. But yeah, and then shortly after, so he kind of went back and forth from Chicago to London throughout his childhood, and so he was in Chicago for the summer, and when he was back in London, his dad took him to see a screening of 2001 that same year, I think, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
As a 7-year-old.
Yeah, and
I feel like that's pretty intense.
Which is technically is rated G. If you go look at like the ratings, it's rated G.
Yeah, but it's such an intense.
Yeah, parts of it are for sure.
Yeah.
Which is funny, but he was like fascinated with it as a kid.
Because
which I've heard a lot of stories of that. I've heard a lot of stories of like kids around that, like for probably like the 2 or 3 decades after the movie, it would screen all the time. And I've heard so many stories of like directors or just like people on like film podcasts that I know, like their parents taking them to see 2001 really young.
Yeah, I guess I never thought of it like, I don't know, it just seems like such a like epic film. You would think it'd be kind of intense, and it's pretty long if I recall.
Yeah, it's actually it's
or maybe
I think
not
10 minutes shorter than Interstellar, so so it has that going for it.
Yeah, I guess.
But
that because I saw that a few years ago again.
No, it's like 20 minutes shorter than Interstellar.
Yeah, but I feel like the special effects in 2001, if I recall, I feel like they held up pretty well over the years.
Yeah,
very similar, actually, I think, to like Star Wars, like that same level.
Yeah, which is cool. I mean, it came out like a decade before Star Wars did, basically, and really, like if you look at what Star Wars was doing with the models and stuff, it's basically like they kind of just did the same thing 2001 did, just faster.
Yeah.
They just moved them faster.
That's true.
But yeah, I mean, I actually rewatched. I've been leading a faith and film small group at my church, and we've been going through like films throughout film history, and so we actually rewatched 2001 for that group recently, and it really does, like, the special effects hold up like so well.
It's amazing.
Like, it looks like a movie that could have been made today. And it's really like, because of the techniques they use are kind of timeless techniques, and it's the same reason Christopher Nolan does so much work to like shoot as much camera as he can.
I mean, you know, I don't know that if technology will ever get to a point where like it looks just as good in post-production as it does like in camera, but I think we're probably still a long ways off from that, because even today, like with the amount of amazing graphics that we have, and there's so much that you can do on the computer.
Oh yeah,
you can still. There's something about in camera effects that you just can't. You still can't touch with like post production, I don't think.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And we'll get into like the CG on this one a little bit later. But yeah, it's definitely like going through this. It's something that Nolan is both like, he's passionate about, you know, shooting as much in camera as he can, as he possibly can, to the degree to where like, I mean, like Interstellar, like, doesn't have any green screen. It has the most computer generated work, but it doesn't have any green screen, because even the computer generated work, they do projection. They do like front projection for it. So, so like he just like, and so then you're still doing all your work pre-production, and like as little as possible post-production. So it's really like you end up putting the same amount of like time and energy and money into it. You're just doing it on the front end instead of on the back end. And it makes it more timeless and feel more like tangible and real when you do it that way, to me.
I think it looks better. For sure.
And I mean, I enjoy, like, I've seen plenty of movies with a lot of like post CG stuff that are like fun and enjoyable movies. It's not to say like you can't make a good movie with, you know, tons and tons of post CG work, but just like if I had to like say like, oh, this is my preference, it's like, watching these movies and seeing how good and kind of timeless they look. Just like 2001, it's just like, man, I wish more people would do it this way,
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think it also shows that like you can do a lot of stuff on like a smaller budget and without a lot of fancy. Like there's a lot of tricks that filmmakers have been using for decades now that you don't have to have like a huge VFX budget to do. So that's cool.
Yeah, for sure. Not to say Christopher Nolan doesn't have huge budgets, because he does.
Yeah, no,
but
of course.
But yeah, even like his quote unquote smaller budget movies, like The Prestige, I want to say was like 40 million, which today is like kind of a mid-budget movie. Like the special effects works in that movie are fantastic. He like really stretched the budget there. To make it feels bigger budget even than it is.
Oh, for sure.
Even doing things like going to Colorado to shoot just a little bit of footage to make it feel so much bigger.
Yeah.
Is goes a long way. But yeah, this script actually, the kind of inception of this script was in 2007. Paramount, working with none other than Steven Spielberg himself. They brought Jonathan Nolan on to write kind of a story and script based on this like 8-page treatment that the physicist Kip Thorne had written, kind of on a story dealing with like black holes and relativity. And so the inception of it actually came, I think it was a producer friend of Carl Sagan. He set Kip Thorne up on a blind date with his like producer friend, and the relationship didn't go anywhere, but out of that came this like 8-page treatment of a story that I guess she convinced Kip Thorne to write.
Wow.
And so that had been sitting around, and Paramount, I guess, wanted Spielberg to do something with it. And so they brought on Jonathan Nolan to write it. And so he had been working on that for I don't know how long, I guess like a couple years. Nolan was doing other movies. And so, yeah, I mean, Spielberg was set up to do this movie.
That's so funny, because thinking of Spielberg doing this movie, I just feel like that would be such a different.
Yeah, for sure.
Such a different movie. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it would. It's funny. So like, really, like the first, I want to, I'm kind of guessing here. I want to say like maybe the first 45 minutes, all the stuff like at the beginning on the farm, it kind of feels like more a Spielberg kind of movie. Which is,
I could see that.
Makes sense, because that's the part of the script that Nolan kept like most to the original. And so and so Spielberg didn't end up doing it, not because he didn't want to, but because there was some like, he moved DreamWorks out of Paramount, which DreamWorks is Spielberg's production company. He like uncoupled DreamWorks from Paramount, and then I think he moved his distribution to Disney at the same time. And so it was basically like Paramount had this script that Jonathan had been working on, but now like Spielberg couldn't do it because they own the script. And so it was just kind of like this, okay, well, now this script is floating out there. And so I think Jonathan approached Paramount, or maybe him and Chris always like, they talk about, they're always like bouncing ideas and sharing their progress of their projects with each other, so he kind of, Chris Nolan knew about it and was interested in it, and so he approached Paramount and was like, hey, can my brother do this movie? And so they at this point, Nolan has like a lot of power as far as like working with studios goes, because he's just had like home run after home run after home run.
Oh, I
and
know.
So it really wasn't a hard sell. But yeah, he signed on. Chris Nolan signed on in 2012 to the project, and I think Spielberg stayed on like as an executive producer too. So
I didn't
he
know
had
that.
kind of like a little bit of, I guess, like interest, or like he had something in the game too for this still, even though he wasn't making it. But yeah, and the crazy thing is Nolan actually, so he's up to this point, I think all the way through Tenet, he was with Warner Brothers. And so he was a Warner Brothers guy. And so he actually, like, to do this movie, he actually got Paramount and Warner Brothers to make this like deal where they would co-produce it, which is actually like really incredible when you think about how rare it is for like big studios like that to co-produce a movie. But I think like Warner Brothers gave Paramount the rights to like a future Friday the 13th movie, and like Paramount gave Warner Brothers something. It was like this like weird,
this all the weird backroom deals that had to go down.
But really, like, Nolan had such like cachet in the industry that he was like, hey, I'm doing the movie. I'm not doing it without my Warner Bros. And y'all got to work out a deal so that we can get this movie made. And they were like, oh, okay. Oh, and by the way, here's $175 million while you're at it. You know, go make the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like either of those studios would be crazy to like turn down that opportunity to work with Nolan.
Yeah. So Nolan takes this script. He worked, so he kept, like I said, he kept the first part of the screenplay pretty close to what Jonathan had already done with it. But then like after that, he kind of did a lot of change. And from my research, there's not a whole lot of detail as to what exactly he was in the original script versus what it ended up being. But I do know there was like these aliens that were in the original script, and there's like some space station that was like parked outside of space and time, and like some like machine that like allowed you to like use gravity to do stuff. And so like all that stuff that was in the original script, Nolan like stripped all that stuff and then basically like rewrote the back end of the movie. And Jonathan I mean, they've worked together. They did The Prestige together and some other movies, and so they're brothers and they're used to working with each other. So Chris, when Chris had like asked Jonathan if he could do it, he said, hey, there's some stuff I want to change and some ideas that I've been wanting to do that like I want to put in there. And he was like, okay, yeah, we'll do it. So and so the script got reworked a lot. But really one of the first things Nolan did is he took like this like 1 or 2 page kind of like, I don't know, maybe like thematic emotional summary to Hans Zimmer. And he basically told Zimmer like, hey, can you write some music for these ideas? And Zimmer was like, okay. And so he took it, and basically like from what I could tell, all that was on it was just kind of the basic ideas. Like, it's a father-child relationship. Here's the emotional core of the movie. Here's maybe some quotes or ideas that are going to be in the movie, but it had nothing about like the setting, nothing about that it was going to be sci-fi, no context around those like ideas or
was it just like the father has to go on a long journey.
Yeah, it's like it's about this father-child relationship and the father, you know, having to leave his child, and it kind of like the emotional core stuff was all that he gave Zimmer, and he was like, "Hey, write something." So Zimmer's like, "Okay." Zimmer, all the like interviews I've seen with Zimmer, he seems like an awesome guy. He's like ready.
Yeah.
He's like up for the challenge. He's like, "Oh yeah, I love it. Let's do it." And so he writes some stuff, and I think it's like one day, like Nolan, or maybe Zimmer called Emma, who's Nolan's wife, and she produces like all of his movies. He called her and was like, "Hey, I have something," and she's like, "Hey, actually, Chris wants to come see it or hear it like in person. Can he come? Can he come over?" And Zimmer's like, "Yeah." And so Nolan goes over to Zimmer's house and sits in the studio, and he plays him some stuff. And the way Zimmer tells it is that like he turned around after he finished, and he was like, "Well, what do you think?" And Nolan kind of sat back in his chair and said, "I suppose I better make the movie now." And then like Zimmer was like, "So what is the movie?" And that's when like Nolan finally tells him, you know, the context and that it's sci-fi and, you know, all the crazy space whatever. And Zimmer's like, "Oh, okay."
That's
which
awesome
is,
though.
I really love that story, because I'm like, man, it's so, because when you listen to the sound, and this sound in this movie is so integral to the movie and the mood. And
well, and I feel like, I don't know how it ranks as far as like best scores of all time, but I feel like it's got to be up there. Also, I just think like that main theme, like I just feel like I hear it like it's such a like used theme, and it's like it can immediately like, I don't know, like it does so much heavy lifting for storytelling, and I think it's one of the best scores. I mean, if not the best. I don't know.
It's definitely
the one
I've listened to the most, honestly.
Yeah. Well, so I think that's it too. It's just so like engaging and like listenable, if that's a word.
Yeah, no, if it's not, it should be, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really is. It's an incredible score, and we'll talk more about that in a minute when we get into production stuff. But yeah, just like wrapping up this section, Nolan says that the name of the film like promises the audience a lot. It's called Interstellar, and it's like this. It's really like when you think about it in that context, like when you hear that the movie's called Interstellar, I guess you do have these like big expectations for it. I'd never thought about that before, but I was like, oh yeah, because I don't often think about that, but I guess like the name of a movie does like have a lot to do with, I guess, its marketability and like the expectations you're setting up for your audience and that sort of thing. I'd never really thought about that before. But yeah, the working talk. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, like that title does make you expect a lot.
Yeah,
it's a pretty big title.
Yeah, but Nolan said, but at the end of the day, it's this is a quote. He said, "It's about a father and his relationship with his children and his destiny to leave his children behind." And that's like kind of that. That sounds like maybe something that was on the little preface he gave to Zimmer. But the original working title was actually called Flora's Letter, and Flora is his oldest child, his daughter. So it's almost like, and I think in the special features, I remember Jessica Chastain saying that she had gone on set and actually met his daughter Flora, and she was like interacting with her, and then it kind of like hit her, because I think, you know, she was aware that the working title was Flora's Letter, and it kind of hit her, I guess, like thinking about this guy, and this is his daughter, and it's called Flora's Letter in the working title, and like thinking about the script, and she's like, wow, this movie is a letter to his daughter. I just thought that was like cool, because at this point in his career, and we kind of talked about it a little bit in Inception, because the kind of like getting back to your kids is a big theme there. But at this point in his career, he's very like familiar with kind of the heartache of leaving your kids for extended periods of time to do the thing that you love doing. That's your work.
Yeah.
And so, and that is really like the emotional core of the movie too.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, I just thought that was, kind of like a really like sweet thing to like name the working title, for your daughter. I thought that was really sweet. As far as influences for this one goes, one of the big things for the first section was there's a Ken Burns documentary from 2012 called The Dust Bowl, and it's kind of about that era of the Dust Bowl and people. I even think some of the footage that they use at the beginning, on the little TVs of people sharing about like.
I think that's from that Ken Burns.
I think it is
documentary.
Yeah. Obviously, like the Ellen Bernstein part isn't, because that's Ellen Bernstein. That one's not, but I think all the other ones are. They actually like use the footage from that documentary.
I feel like I've seen at least part of that documentary at some point.
I've never seen it, so yeah.
But yeah,
it seems like it would be super interesting.
Well, I think the vibe of, if you can call the Dust Bowl a vibe, but that part of the country at that time, I think is very, like, you can see that influence and reminiscence of that in sort of what's happening on Earth, like at the beginning of Interstellar. Like, it's very much like, I think, a mirror of the Dust Bowl.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that gives this movie, it like starts it off with like a very interesting, I guess you could say, vibe, or like atmosphere, because most movies that like are sci-fi and they're dealing with this like dystopian or apocalyptic future, they don't, this one almost feels like, to depict that, it goes back in time instead of like forward in time. So like the beginning of this movie has a very like Americana kind of like feel to it, which is so unusual for like a like apocalyptic future kind of movie, which it's very unique in that way. And I guess that's like mostly thanks to Jonathan's part of the script. Very like smartly written as far as that goes.
Well, and I think like focusing it on like a family and a small town, like, I think really narrows the scope and like just points the focus at those relationships. Because I feel like if it was like, it's the outskirts of Manhattan, and it's like, I feel like when you get into these bigger like cities and stuff, you sort of lose, I think, some of the impact of the story, and like you lose some of the character, I think, in some ways, because it's like, it's like the trope with like all the Marvel movies, like when the stakes are like the universe, it's like, okay, well, I mean, sure, I guess it's all in danger, but it's like you lose that personal story, and I think when you do that, it's hard as an audience member to like really care about what's happening. And so I think keeping like the cast small, and it's like a small town, a specific family that you don't really know about anybody else other than like what's happening right there. And so I think that helps you like care a lot more about the people. Yeah, for sure. It focuses in really well to kind of build, because you really do have to build that emotional
foundation at the beginning of the movie, because it gets so like big and dramatic and intense later in the movie. So you kind of have to have that foundation already built.
Yeah.
And so
he does such a good job of building that emotional attachment for sure.
Yeah. And, you know, along with that, along with where the movie ends up going, I wrote down this quote from Jonathan, which he uses some explicatives in the original quote that I just took out. So
gotcha.
You can use your imagination of where and what they were. If I don't recommend doing that, but you know, if that's your thing, then. But he said, "I grew up with Apollo space travel. We were promised jetpacks and teleportation, and instead we got Facebook and Instagram." I loved that quote because, I put it in the influences section because I really do think a big influence here is Chris and Jonathan Nolan thinking back to just like when they were kids and what it was like to live kind of in that space travel, like Apollo mission, like era, and like the influence of that, like on the rest of their life, because when that's such a big part of the culture, that's like focused on like these like courageous missions, like exploring something for this kind of like for the sake of exploring it, because like you can gain knowledge and you can like learn things and you can do things that have never been done before. Like that was a huge part of the culture, and like the societal push behind those missions was just that idea and drive toward exploration. And so I think just like I put it in the influences section because I do think that is a huge influence on what they're trying to do with this movie. That comes from their cultural experience from when they were kids. But I can definitely see that. We were promised
I feel like
teleportation.
I don't know if it was him or somebody else, but I feel like it was somebody say, you know, we were promised flying cars, but we got like 180 characters or whatever. Referring to Twitter in the early days. But it's like, there has been, and I think, you know, you can look around and you know, how much of your life is really materially different than what it was or what it could have been 70 years ago, 50 years ago, aside from your smartphone and maybe your computer. I mean, you know, there's not a whole lot that's that different.
Right.
I mean, people still drive to work. You know, it's the day-to-day stuff. I don't think it's really changed all that much.
Yeah, it really hasn't. It's pretty. It's just like how you get about doing what you're gonna do is a little different, is all. With you know, with just like the advancements in computers, but even that, it's like I don't know. I guess like when you're living in that age, like you grow up in like the 70s and 80s and 90s, like he would have been in his 30s in the 90s, I guess, or no, he would have been in his 20s in the 90s. And so like when that's like your whole like kind of childhood and like young adult period, and everything is just like growing exponentially, and it does kind of feel like things have kind of like plateaued out a little bit as far as like advancements and stuff. And then, I don't know if like all this AI stuff will change that, but I don't know. It doesn't really. It could, but I don't know. Well, I guess we'll have to see, I guess.
I mean, I think like the bulk of the advancements have just all been software based, more or less. I mean, like, some hardware stuff is getting better, but it's like, you know, like if you look at your house, you know, what like substantial technological changes can you notice in your house, I guess, would be the thing. It's like, no, there's
tankless
still
water heater. That's about it.
Yeah. And you don't even see that. And so it's like, it's like, I would think like a kid in the 60s or like, during the Apollo space program and stuff, you're thinking like, in 20 years, like, my house is going to be made out of moon rock or something. I don't know.
We're going to have the Jetsons robot as our maid,
Exactly. But it's like, but so much of that just never really materialized. As it turns out, like material sciences and engineering is, I guess, harder than it turned out to be, than it was expected. But
yeah. Either that or the government's hiding it all from us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now we're getting somewhere.
Oh, yeah. But, I mean, like, influences, you could probably, like, go on forever. Obviously, like, we talked about Star Wars in 2001. He mentions, he has, like, a less, like, definitive memory of Close Encounters, but he remembers Close Encounters, like, being a very, like, interesting movie to him as a kid and growing up. And the space movie, but he also he actually screened for his crew the movie The Right Stuff by Philip Kaufman, which I've never seen. It's a 1987 movie.
I don't know that I've seen that either.
Yeah, it's an 87 movie kind of about I want to say, I'm pulling it up so I can be it's just like the formation of the space program in America, basically.
Okay.
So he screened that for his crew, I think for several reasons, just because a big one was he wanted this movie not to be like too futuristic feeling, but feel kind of like grounded in actual like space travel and like more modern NASA stuff. And so that was an influence. Hoyt van Hoytema was the DP, the cinematographer for this. It was their first collaboration together.
Okay.
And so up to this point, he had been working with Wally Pfister on all of his other stuff. And Pfister, I think, had decided he wanted to go into trying to direct a movie. And so he wasn't available. So he got hooked up with Hoyt van Hoytema, who I think at this point, his biggest, the most well-known movie maybe he had been on was Let the Right One In, which was it's either Swedish or Norwegian vampire movie.
Sweet.
And it's actually really good. I watched it earlier this year for the first time. But yeah, I want to say that was he. You know what? He had done something else before he came on for this. It was pulling it up now. Tinker Tailor's Soldier Spy. He had done. He had worked on also before this, and The Fighter, the David O. Russell one with Christian Bale.
Okay.
He had done those before this too. So he had done a couple of American movies at this point. But yeah, he hooked up with Nolan, and they kind of clicked because they have like similar, I guess, like goals with trying to capture as much in camera as possible. But yeah, Hoyte had said that some of the things he had watched to kind of like get the atmosphere for what he wanted it to look like were some Tarkovsky films like Solaris and Mirror and Stalker. And I can see some of that and some of the sequences. Yeah. So that was some influence on the cinematography route, but I honestly didn't run into a whole lot of talk about influences. Some of the Nolan films that I've done research for, he's naming like 10 different films, and you're like, man, how could I ever talk about all of these films in the influences section? But this one really, like, that was pretty much all I had found. I'm sure there's more, but in my research, that's what I ran into. And it's hard, when you make a space movie not to like have it be compared to and say it's influenced by 2001. I mean, it's like the definitive space sci-fi movie. But yeah, so production on this one was a 6-month shoot, started in August 2013. Like I said, $175 million budget is really big budget. Not as big as the Batman budgets, but still really big.
You didn't have to build a Batmobile, so
that's true. He didn't have to build the Batmobile and fly Batman off of roofs and stuff, those episodes were really fun to do as far as like all the special effects goes, talking through all that. A lot of like fun stuff in there. If you haven't listened to those, if you're listening to this, I definitely recommend listening to those. One of the cooler things about the production of this, I think, is they went to Alberta, Canada. It's somewhere in Canada, I'm pretty sure, Alberta, for like the cornfield and farm sequences. And so, which is interesting.
It's a lot of corn and cows, I think, in Alberta.
Yeah. Where they did the cornfields is actually like not ideal for corn growing. Like they got like farmers as consultants in to help them like figure out if they can make it happen and stuff. But the goal, I think, was, so when you watch the kind of the wide shots of the field, you can kind of see like mountains kind of out in the distance. And he wanted that feel of like, because it's this world where they're having to grow just corn everywhere. He wanted this feel of like corn growing somewhere where it shouldn't be growing. Yeah. Which to me, I'm like, it's funny because like I wouldn't know. Like I personally wouldn't know, so I'm not going to get that feeling. But I guess like if farmers watched the movie, they would know. But like it's just one of the things that like directors are thinking about, that like that I'm
I think it's one of those things that probably Nolan is thinking about. Like,
exactly.
I don't know how many other people are thinking about that, but but it makes sense now that you say it.
Yeah, but they actually, so they planted all that corn for this movie. Like they didn't go and just find a cornfield. I think one of the guys was saying they had like 350 acres in one location and like 500 acres of corn in another. And so they had to actually, like, they used their budget to invest in the corn. Like you're probably a little bit more familiar with like how the farming industry works than I am, because I know y'all have done some like stuff, like some small scale stuff.
Yeah, but like we haven't planted acres of corn, but yeah.
But it's like you have to like apparently invest in the crop, and then it's just kind of like,
I mean, you've got to buy all the seed and all the fertilizer.
So
you got to have somebody who has the tractor to.
Yeah, they had a farmer do
or the drill or whatever.
Yeah.
No, it's to get to a mature cornfield of that scale. It would take some money for sure.
Yeah. The Hoyte in one of the special features was saying, we went out there and the corn was like not even up to our knees and we were getting really nervous. And he was like, but I just didn't know how fast corn grew. And, all of a sudden it was like the perfect height.
Yeah.
And that's
funny.
Yeah. So they actually, they invested all that in planting all that corn, and they actually made all their money back because they harvested the corn and they made all their money back that they invested in. And I think they even like made a little bit of a profit off of the corn.
Well, if it was a good year, then if you're able to harvest most of it, then you should.
Yeah, I think
for sure.
I think that's what they said, is they were able to harvest like the majority of it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, just a really fun like production fact for that. And in Alberta, Canada, had that.
So that would have been the Canadian Rockies, which you would have seen those mountains in the background. Yeah.
It is.
That's awesome. My wife is from Alberta, so.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's just really cool. And so like they did some other stuff in Alberta, like they obviously the farmhouse is, in the middle of the cornfield, and that was not there. They built that house like for the movie, like from the ground up. So they like
Oh, really?
they would go out there with like this little model, and they would be like placing it in different directions to see where like at different time, the time of day they'd be shooting to see where the lighting was best. And then they built the house like at the right angle for the shooting.
For the best lighting. Yeah. That's awesome. Of course
so
they did.
That's really cool that they like, I wonder if that house is still there, if like it's like a usable house now. I don't know.
So is that, but that wasn't in Alberta?
Yeah, that was. It was in the cornfields.
They put the house. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
They built it out there, and then they also shot
some farmers' cornfield.
I guess, yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. So, maybe it's still there. I don't know, but and then like the scenes, like the baseball field scene is in Alberta. And the town where all the dust storm is coming through, that's like a little town somewhere in Alberta.
Okay.
So they shot.
I didn't realize they did so much in Alberta. That's cool.
Yeah, they shot all basically like they probably did some of this stuff maybe in LA or maybe somewhere else, but I think the vast majority of like that whole opening part of the movie is in Alberta.
That's cool.
Yeah, and then obviously like all of the space stuff is like on sound stages in LA. They
and I mean obviously they had to film in a black hole too, but
yeah, they obviously didn't go to
still
space.
Remains a mystery. How did he pull that one off?
Yeah, it's I think one of the guys in the special feature, I don't remember who it was. It wasn't a guy that I was familiar with, but he was like, yeah, I think if it was an option, Nolan would have us all out in space shooting this movie.
Probably.
But yeah, they the other on location stuff they did was for the planets. So the I think it's like Miller's planet, which is the water planet, and Man's planet, the ice planet.
I'm assuming they went to like Iceland.
Yep. Yeah. Iceland for both of those. So the ice planet is actually shot on a glacier, the same glacier they used for the beginning of Batman Begins.
Oh, nice.
So there's that opening sequence, where he's like going up to Ra's al Ghul's like League of Shadow location. That's shot in Iceland on that glacier. And so they went back. It's at some national, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of the national park. But it's some like
Too
national
many
park. Yeah. It's like, I think it's one of the biggest glaciers in Europe. And it's really, really beautiful. Like obviously it's beautiful in the movie, but also like just watching the kind of behind the scenes stuff, it's like beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, Iceland is one of the most like beautiful countries.
Yeah.
I feel
it worked out well because it's also a country where like you don't have to go far to have a completely different setting. Like, and so like it really wasn't that far away that it was like this very shallow lake that they shot the water planet in.
Oh, cool.
And so, they had built the model, they had built the ships, full scale like ships, as like these little, they're basically like movable sets. And so they filmed the ice planet stuff first, I think. And then they like they were able to like load them on trucks and drive them over to the lake to shoot the water planet stuff. And they're like, landing them in the water with like these cranes and stuff. Really fun stuff to watch. And really like, I think the other thing that makes this movie like look incredible is the IMAX. Obviously, like Nolan is like the IMAX guy, and so this is his now. So Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises both had IMAX footage. I don't think Inception did. They didn't do any IMAX in Inception. And then this is his movie. So this is his third movie with a lot of IMAX footage. I think there's like over an hour of like IMAX 70 millimeter footage in this movie. And what's incredible is Hoyte van Hoytema. So, obviously IMAX cameras are like super heavy. They're like these huge, like 50s, with all the like equipment and the attachments to carry it. It's like even more than that, even more than like 50 pounds. And like you see, like if you watch the background footage, like Hoyte van Hoytema was like determined to have a handheld style for a lot of stuff. And he's just like lugging around this huge IMAX camera on his shoulder. And it's like, man, that guy must have been like seeing a chiropractor daily.
I'm sure.
For that production. But yeah, he was
using one of those like one of those rigs, like where you can strap
it's like
it on
this,
and hold it over your head.
It's like the camera is sitting like, it's huge. So it's like hanging off the back of his shoulder on this little rig. And he has this like pole coming down off of it that he's like holding on to. And I'm sure it's like harnessed to him around his waist, somehow too. But it's just,
that would be just a bear to
try and
film with.
And then he was also determined to like shoot like in the sets. So in they have these sets for the inside of the Endurance ship. And it's pretty tight quarters, but he was like shooting in IMAX. He was like had this huge IMAX camera in these like tight quarters in this ship, like shooting. And it, he talks about like, it gives the feel of like how actually like tight quarters those ships would be. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I totally get that. But it's just like impressed with the determination.
Yeah.
The determination is impressive for sure. And this actually broke the IMAX film platter standard. So the like max was up to this point was 2.5 hours for a runtime. And no, this movie is over 2.5 hours, obviously. And so, it like broke the film platter is just like for maybe listeners who aren't aware, is like you can just think of the reel. Up to this point, IMAX would only do like 2.5 hours. And
did he go to IMAX and was like, I need you to build me one that's like 2 hours and 45 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I think he did it again for Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
I think he was like, okay, I need one that's like 8 hours.
Yeah. Oh man. But I mean, he can do that because he's Christopher Nolan.
What's so ridiculous. Yeah.
You need guys like him that are like determined to like progress like the use of that stuff. And
right.
And too, like Hoyte was very like Hoyte's actually done. So he has an episode on the Team Deacons podcast that I listened to, and he was talking about how he's done like these master classes on like shooting in IMAX, and how like him and like he and Nolan are like really like trying to progress the technologies of shooting in IMAX, like just to show people like, hey, you can do this, like you can shoot these movies on celluloid in IMAX, like, and it looked good, and it you
just don't need a back at the end of it.
Yeah.
You can do it handheld.
In Dunkirk they did, which we'll obviously talk about that next week for the Dunkirk episode, but they developed a ton of like cool like new rig technology for like these IMAX cameras.
That's awesome
to get a lot of the Dunkirk footage. But yeah, it starts, here on Interstellar with him and Hoyt to really like trying to like make full use of that format. Which is it, and to me it pays off, because anytime like that, I'm watching it on my TV at home, like, and it's it's just my home TV. It's not anything like, it's not like I have a home theater, but anytime like the screen goes boom and hits those IMAX footages and just like expands to fill the screen, it really is like captivating and like impressive to watch.
For sure.
But how do you feel as a cameraman about lugging around a IMAX camera on your shoulder? Interested?
I wouldn't be into that. No. I'm always trying to think like, what's the least amount of rigging I have to do? I work very lightweight, and
understandably, for sure.
I'm not that committed to my craft. I don't even use film.
Yeah. I mean, really, like it's becoming less and less of a thing. And I had my friend Houston on for the Dark Knight episode, and he's very much into like cameras, and he kind of was talking about in that episode how really like the digital cameras, he used like some technical jargon that I can't remember off the top of my head, but like the digital cameras now have really like very close, if not like equal, like light capturing quality as like film does, as like an IMAX, like 70 millimeter film camera does.
Oh yeah, I mean the digital stuff has come a really long way.
Mm-hmm. Like a lot of movies now that are like that will show an IMAX are shot on like the RE cameras, the RE digital cameras, and they're like IMAX approved or certified. I think IMAX has like a certification that digital cameras can get now, or
certain
something.
Ones, yeah. Mm-hmm. Things like the RE Alexa and Alexa Mini. Mm-hmm. It's what a lot of folks use. Like a lot of feature films are made on those these days.
Yeah. There's some others like the new Mission Impossible was shot on Sony Venice, I think, or something like that. Which is another one that's a digital that's IMAX certified.
I want to say I saw something about the I think it was the Creator movie was shot on like on a FX3, I think, which is like, well, I don't know if the whole thing was, but at least sequences of it, which is like, it's a pretty like consumer level camera.
Okay.
The FX3. I mean, like it's a pro camera, but it's like,
right.
It's a few $1,000.
Movie.
It's a few $1,000 versus like, multiple tens of thousands for like these other ones. But
right. Yeah, the Creator is a beautiful movie. I was able to get to theaters and see it, and it's another example of a movie where they did a lot of on location shooting and added in stuff in post, but it it has that real background in in kind of Southeast Asia, where the setting is, and so like it really does make a difference getting that real on location stuff. But yeah, it is a beautiful movie. I think I think visually is where it soars. Like what's the best thing about it for me?
I haven't seen it, but
it's worth seeing, if for nothing else than like how awesome it looks.
That's awesome.
So, I had some issues with like the storytelling and stuff. But yeah, visually and like world building wise, it's like master level, like just looks incredible.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Daniel did a review, I think, on that one. But yeah, I only, most of my like current movie knowledge just comes from whatever we've reviewed on the Collision, secondhand from Daniel. He's the one that gets to see the movies, and I just get to hear him
for
talk
sure
about it.
Go like moving on from camera, because like my camera knowledge is very limited. So, but moving to we've talked a little bit about the score, but I think one of the cool things about this score is the use of the pipe organ. So like I think Nolan threw pretty early on at Zimmer like, hey, I think I want a lot of like organ in this, and Zimmer's like, okay. Never worked with organ before, but we can, we'll see what we can do.
I'm surprised if he hadn't worked with organ before.
Yeah, like he's obviously he's a composer, so like he's probably done something with it before, but I don't think for a score, and especially not for like it. The organ is kind of like the central, instrument for the score for this. And
I think the organ is like, I feel like one of the most powerful instruments
it is
in the world.
Yeah. And hearing Zimmer talk about it, he's like, it's an instrument that you can like feel on like multiple levels. So, like I remember we were on a trip in New York City, and whenever I pass St. Patrick's it's right off of Rockefeller Center. It's a like if you saw a picture of it, you'd probably be like, oh, okay, that church. But it's this huge church, and if ever the few times I've been in New York, probably like 4 or 5 times, and I think I've gone in St. Patrick's every time just because it's beautiful. But I remember one time we were there around Easter, and we walked in, and they were like rehearsing for like their Easter service or something, and the organ was playing, and it was just like incredible.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then another time I walked in, and this is the time that stands out. Another time I walked in, and they had the organist playing before a mass service. Was a mass service was going to start, in the near future, and I guess they have like some music before it, and he was playing this like kind of like a typical thing you would think of with organ, this like big haunting with like those deep tones and like stuff, and like I walked in and I just like stood there. I was like taking it in. You can like feel like you can feel the reverberations of it like in the whole huge church.
Well, those church, I mean, like especially like old churches like that one, and most churches like throughout Europe, it feels like sometimes they were all like built for the organ. Because all the acoustics of I mean, it's just it's insane.
So they went to the Temple Church in like South London, I think, and they got this organist, Roger Sayer. There was like a whole part of the kind of behind the scenes documentary on the special features showing this guy like playing the organ, and it's just like, for one, like one of the things I've always loved about watching someone play the organ is like it's a very physical performance as much as it is like a musical one, because you have to use your whole body to play it, basically.
It's ridiculous. Like, I don't know how anybody can play the organ. Like, it's such
I don't either.
Like mind blowing. It's the same with like the accordion or concertina to me. I mean, except you add your feet, I guess.
Yeah.
But like, how do you keep up with all the things that are going on? Yeah. Like it's incredible.
Yeah, because I mean you've got both feet going on both like the bass notes are these big pedals on the floor. I don't know if all the listeners have ever actually like seen someone play an organ. If you haven't, like pause and go watch something on YouTube. But
stop this and go find your nearest organ concert.
Yeah. You've got like these pedals also on the floor, in addition to like the big bass note keys. And then like you've got usually like multiple levels of keys up top that have different like sounds and octaves. And then all the stops, which are like these little things you pull out to like change the way the pipes work and the way they sound, and like it's just like, and you're doing all of that stuff at the same time.
Because you can like be playing this cute little thing, and then you like start pulling out more stops, and it just becomes this like monster, you know, and it's just like, whoa, like, which is just, I don't know, it's such an amazing instrument to me, and I think it is like the most powerful instrument that I think humanity has ever created. If you want to have like very like moving and like powerful music, like the organ is the place to go.
And I think like, so I think the combination of just like how big and imposing the sound is, and then just like just how it's like, it's a very like physically and emotionally, I think like when I watch someone like play the organ and like actually like really like laying into it, playing it, like Roger Sayer is for some of this score, it doesn't just look like tiring physically, but he's like, you can tell there's a lot of emotion that goes into it too. Which, you know, is something about instruments in general that I think is interesting, the amount of like emotion that like people put into their playing. But with an organ, it's just like on another level, because it's your whole body, it's basically like all of your being is going into making this instrument like sound the way it sounds. And I think that comes through just like putting in a pair of earbuds and listening to the score. It comes through just even in that way, you know.
You get that. You I feel like both the actual score and like the instrument used, like using the organ to do that score, I think like there's just so much emotion already charged into that music, and then you layer the story on top of that, and like what's happening, it's just sort of like it's so much emotion in one movie.
And it's like it is all layered for sure on top of each other, and very powerful. One of the things about the score that I thought was interesting, so he did the organ in this church. He also like brought in like kind of a mobile recording unit and brought the orchestra into the church too to record all the other stuff. But one of the things I thought was really cool that I don't know that I noticed while watching the movie, maybe like one of those things you notice maybe subconsciously but not like aren't aware of, but apparently like the farther they get away from Earth, the more kind of like distorted from the sounds of the themes the music gets. So they start employing these like different like a little bit off of the normal way you would play your instrument sort of thing into it. And then I think even like the notes like stray a little bit from like the original, like whatever say you're playing this theme, like the notes get a little bit off this way or that from what the original theme was.
I guess the idea of like sound waves as you're moving away from the point of sound, it's going to sound distorted. It's like how if a siren passes you, when it's coming towards you, it sounds very different than when it's going away from you.
Right.
And so, that's kind of cool. No, I don't think I noticed that.
But it probably,
movie, but that's awesome.
I think probably like how it works subconsciously, even if you're not aware of it, is just that. So like he's also like playing with that idea of memory. So like the farther you get away from something, like the more like your memory kind of like distorts a little bit of what actually it was. And so like as they're moving farther away from Earth and their families, like the score is like distorting in the same way like that their memory of what they've left behind is. And I think that's maybe how it works kind of emotionally on a subconscious level. Like working with like the theme of what's happening. Which I think is really like Zimmer gets like, I think, a bad rap for being like a maybe like a pop composer. But he's like a very, very thoughtful composer. Like he's like
philosopher composer.
Yeah, he is.
Because he like he's very thoughtful in his compositions, I think, and he's trying to do things with them beyond just like this is a happy song,
right?
This is the sad song, like
exactly, yeah.
It's like this is a song that asks a question. It's like well, okay, I didn't think about that, but yeah, it does kind of sound like that. And,
like I remember in the Dark Knight Rises. Yeah, I guess it was last week in the Dark Knight Rises. I remember he had talked about how for Catwoman's theme, he was like, yes, Catwoman, you know, she has this like moral ambiguity, and so I tried to make the melody morally ambiguous for her theme. And I was like, what does that even mean? Like who thinks in that way? But that's all the level that he's thinking on as a composer. Which
it really comes out. I think it really comes out in Interstellar, like his greatness, I guess you could say.
Oh yeah, I think it's like one of my favorite scores ever, for sure.
I find myself listening to it all the time. Like if I'm doing some work and trying to get some stuff done, it's like, I guess I'll listen to Interstellar again. Like, why not?
Yeah, for sure.
Just weep and just.
Yeah, like
why did he have to go?
Staring at your screen, just like McConaughey, and weeping, but because of the score, not because you're watching 20 years of your kids. But the design of this, I think, is really interesting. So I do think this comes through this. I think it's similar to 2001 in that really like a lot of the design is more like pretty grounded. It's not like too out there. So like when you're looking at the control panels, it's not like all this like very futuristic looking stuff. It's like buttons and knobs and like laptops, like they're using, like it's very like grounded in kind of modern stuff. He had said he didn't want it too futuristic. The quote I wrote down was, he said everything was based on a contemporary reality, and he kind of used like current NASA as like the benchmark.
And I think that's I think that's one of those things that, like, keeping it in a small town and one family, like grounding it in familiar things. Because I think when you start to add in elements that are like just totally off the wall, or like way into the future, like, hey, this is going to be the Jetsons or something, it's like you begin like it's another like something for the audience to overcome, to like buy into the story. And so I think it's a really smart way to design something that is a very complicated story, and sort of hard to tell, but it's another layer that's like, okay, this I can believe this, like this seems legitimate,
right?
Like, and so I really appreciate that, those elements that seem so familiar and grounded in reality, even though they're going to get up to some stuff that's pretty fanciful.
Oh yeah, and real like even like down to like the spacesuits and like the sets for like the inside of the ship and stuff are just like very like, so like the suits are very like, they're not like these sleek like flashy suits like you see in a lot of sci-fi stuff. They're pretty like just normal practical like NASA suits. And even like they even were like kind of really hot inside, and they had these like cooling water cooled shirts on, just like similar to what actual astronauts use.
That's awesome.
And then like the inside of the like there's a special feature where Nathan Crowley, the production designer who's worked with Nolan a lot, kind of takes you through they had 3 different sets built for like the pods for the Endurance, which the Endurance, Nolan said like he wanted it to feel like the International Space Station, where like it's like it looks like these separate pieces that have been like built and flown out and added in, just like the International Space Station was, and it kind of does have that feel to it.
Like
and
the
then
different sections of it.
Yeah. So they built, sets for like basically like 3 different sorts of pods that were on the Endurance. And like even in those, like he's taking you around and he's like showing you all the like just practical stuff. Like, oh yeah, this chair folds out of the floor and this table folds out from the wall. And like, yeah, we like when the seats rotate back for like a launch or something, now there's a control panel right here for them. And just like all this like really cool practical stuff. And one of the things was like, yeah, and there's handles everywhere. So like if you look around like the ship, there's just like handles on the ceiling and handles over here. Because like it's just like, yeah, you're going to be floating around in 0G. You need something to hold on to wherever you are. And so I was like, man, they really like put a ton of thought into these little sets.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And even like, so they built the Ranger and the Lander, which are like the ships that they take out. The Ranger's like taking it out of the Endurance, and the Lander's the one that like goes down and lands like on the planet. It's supposed to be the thing that like becomes your camp on the planet you're trying to make habitable or whatever. But yeah, they even built those like where you could be like inside of them sort of thing. And they used them both like on location in Iceland, and then they shipped them back to LA and like put them on rigs in the studio sets that's where they did a lot of like the front projection stuff. So like instead of CGing like the outside of the window while they're inside of these ships, they did like front projection on these huge like 80-foot wraparound screens. Of like the CG work that they had done for like the outer space and the black holes and stuff like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's just like really cool. Even Tarzan Case, like they built, this was a really cool thing to watch. So Tarzan Case are these puppeteered things. So the only time like they're CG'd is when they're like doing something that couldn't really be puppeteered. So like anytime they're like folding out all these different things, like that's computer generated because you can't really puppeteer that. And then like, but even like on the water planet, when Case is saving Dr. Brand and like rotating through the water, they have like this, they obviously had to build several different versions of these for the different like things they're doing. But like when he's like rolling, they have him like on this rig that's on like this 4-wheeler that they have driving through the water, like rotating it. So like even that's not CG'd. Cool. It's like caught in camera. All they did post is obviously like CG out like the guy on the on the 4-wheeler. Yeah. But yeah, it really cool. But yeah, they're puppeteered. So they're these huge like stainless steel things that they've engineered with these like. So they had these like aluminum versions with these cables that it's Bill Irwin is the guy that does Tars, and he puppeteers it. And
so
it's
are they
yeah, he's
inside
attached
this
to the
thing?
back of it in this like
Oh,
gray.
wow.
He's like all in gray, so they have to like CG him out if he ever shows up.
Wow.
And originally, like they had these cables, so he would pull like these like cable things. But then they decided to go with stainless steel ones, so they had to engineer these like the cables wouldn't work anymore because it was so heavy.
Yeah,
so
you
they
need
had
like
to like
hydraulics or
yeah,
something.
there's like hydraulics in the little puppeteer thing. So like you can watch this. You can probably pull up on YouTube like Tars like puppeteer and like watch, but it's really like it's both cool and kind of funny to watch. Walk around behind Tars.
Yeah.
And I also love how they decided like to they didn't do anything really to his voice. It's just his voice. They didn't like make it sound robot-y or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to me like that they like I wonder what inspired their robots to be like that.
Yeah.
Did you see any in your research, did you find any like, because it seems like such an unusual form factor for a robot.
Yeah, so in the movie they are they're like these ex-military
right
robots, and so their form is kind of
I guess for battle.
It's like this very like functional, so they fold out in all these different ways, and like they actually have like different ones for different like I guess like different functions. So like Case and Tars are actually like a little bit different. If you watch like the way they walk, it's a little bit different even.
Okay.
And so like Case is the one on the planet with them, and I think he's maybe more of an on the ground kind of guy, like military robot than Tars is, who seems to be more of like an on the ship guy.
Gotcha.
And so and I can't remember. I did watch, like they did talk a little bit about the design of them. It seems like they just like really liked the idea of this very like these sleek, practical like they didn't I think one of the goals was like to have them be as least like humanoid looking as they could make them, which like making them like basically
these big
rectangles is pretty good at doing that.
Yeah,
but
I'd say they succeeded.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it does. But at the same time, like having them like puppeteered kind of gives some personality to them, and then like having the voices be just the voice of the voice actor. It gives it this like weird. It gives you the feeling of like this robot feels like human, but like kind of distant from the actual humans at the same time, which I guess is it makes sense for like an AI robot to feel that way.
You don't put the AI robot in like a human looking body,
right?
That would just be like too freaky. But if you put it in a big square or a big rectangle, like you can
it basically, I mean, it really is reminiscent of like HAL 9000 just not stuck on the wall as like a red eye in the wall. It's like it really is reminiscent of HAL.
Like you never forget that they're robots,
right?
You know, even though they've got a lot of personality and like, because what was it that he like
humor setting and
his humor setting, like
he has a little light that comes on when it's like, which I wonder if like that's like a Nolan wishes like he could tell when people were joking or not, so he like added that on his robot.
Exactly.
And then like his truth setting was like 90% or something.
Right.
Which is another like, I don't know, I guess that's probably interesting in its own right, but Tars and Case, we need more movies with Tars and Case. I think maybe some spin-offs, the adventures of Tars and Case, maybe.
Where are they now?
What's Tars up to in that? Oh, I guess Tars came out of the black hole with him at the end.
Yeah.
Where are they now would be fun for sure.
A nice little short film or something.
Yeah. Special effects is always fun in Nolan movies. I don't remember who the special effects supervisor was for this. But it did a lot of like really cool stuff. I mean, they had to set corn on fire, which apparently I didn't know this, but green corn doesn't really burn like that. And so,
I mean, it's like anything any plant that's green is not going to really go up in a blaze.
Yeah. So they did like, I think one of the guys like said to Nolan, like, green corn doesn't burn. And Nolan was like, well, in my movie it does. And
it's got to burn.
Yeah, it's got to burn in my movie, so it's going to. And so they did like propane for the fire and burnt some diesel for the smoke. Nice. They used this like food filler that was like blown with like fans for the dust. Some sort of like, I don't know. It's kind of disturbing that stuff is in food. But
food filler, like that, just
food filler. When he said that,
questions.
I was like, oh, this is terrible. But I guess like it's also like biodegradable, so it's like good to use for like stuff like that, because you're not really like messing up the environment or anything. We talked a lot about already, like case and like the front projection for the stuff. The 0G stuff was really fun to watch. They did like the stunt people for that did like 7 to 8 weeks of rehearsal for all the 0G stuff. And they used several different techniques, so that it wasn't like, basically like their idea behind using different techniques was so that the audience wouldn't like see the same technique over and over and be like, oh, I know how they're doing that. So it's always like for different like parts of what they're doing, it's like a different like special effects technique that they're using, so that it doesn't all necessarily look the same. So you can't be like, oh, I know what they did. So like they use like these like full body harness things with like 4 cables, so you had like kind of a full range of motion, with, you know, turning your body this way and that. And then they use like some seesaw rigs with like weighted on one end, and they're like, it's like attached at their hips, and so they're like kind of like on this thing, and so you get sort of like that seesaw floaty effect. I can't remember. It seems like they did some other stuff too. Those are the 2 that I remember seeing on the Blu-ray special features. But yeah, it turns like they did a really good job. I mean, so they also have like, they built like vertical sets that were like replicas of the normal set for some of it too, where they're going like up and down. So I mean, all that stuff is really fun. It's more fun to go watch them do it than to hear me like describe it. So I would recommend doing that.
I'll have to go get that behind the scenes DVD.
Yeah. If you don't have it, you can always like get it at the library and do that. I've done that for several of these.
The library, man, what a great resource.
Oh yeah,
I'm a huge fan.
I do own the Interstellar one on Blu-ray, but yeah, for like, I didn't have like Insomnia, so I got that at the library, and it's good. It's good for especially for this, where I'm like researching all the behind the scenes stuff. One of the things I did like was, so when they have in the studio like the Ranger, where McConaughey's like, you know, cruising around on the Ranger in space, they had this like hydraulic rig that it was on, and the way it was controlled was they basically had like a small version of the hydraulic rig, and you like press down like on the four like corners of it, like to make to like match the motion of what the rig was going to do. So like whichever way you move this like small version of it is how like the big rig is going to move basically.
Oh, interesting.
And so it actually showed like most of the time Nolan was actually the one like running that, like moving the rig, because for him there's certain things, like one of the things Nolan I've kind of learned about him is there's certain things like that where he would rather just do it himself because he has in his mind like the way he wants the motion to look. Yeah. And so if it's possible for him to just do it himself, he's like, I'm just going to do it. Like, and yeah, so I thought that was really cool, like to see him just like there on set, like moving this spaceship around with this controller. You just don't see like directors doing that sort of stuff a lot. So it's just like as another thing that makes me respect him and you know, as just a filmmaker, like getting in there and doing stuff like that too. It's really cool. One of the like coolest things about this film is the CG stuff. So Kip Thorne, I had mentioned him, I guess, at the very beginning, but Kip Thorne was also an executive producer on this. He's a physicist, and he's sort of like the guy on all like things gravity and relativity. And he was involved from the very beginning of the film, like working on all the science stuff. So Nolan wanted as much could be like grounded in actual science of this film to be grounded in actual science. And so Kip Thorne worked with the CG group, like to get basically like he would write out all these equations of, okay, here's how the wormhole would work and look and function like mathematically and scientifically. And the CG team would then like take all these equations that Thorne was feeding them and like plug them into their models to create these visualizations of it.
That's awesome.
And so it's really cool to watch like those parts of the behind the scenes, because Kip Thorne is like kind of giddy about it, because it's basically like stuff that's never really been visualized before. And so like they have like all this math and stuff, but they've never actually like taken the time and they're, I guess, like had this amount of like money and resource to put into like actually like visualizing these things. And so really like when you watch this movie, at least up to this point, like Kip Thorne would say, I don't know if what work's been done in visualizing black holes after this movie, but at the time of its release, Thorne would say like, this is the best visualization of a black hole, you know, we've ever had, which is really cool. Like to go to a movie and walk out, like you probably wouldn't know that if you're just like casually seeing the movie, but like learning that, you're like, wow, I've seen probably like the best picture of a black hole like I'm ever going to see in a blockbuster movie, you know?
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. And so like, there's all this, like, it's very interesting to me. But also like, it's hard to describe because I'm not Kip Thorne. But there is tons of like really interesting stuff about like the way black holes work and how like the way they're typically shown in movies is like is off and not quite right. And you know, the like shining discs around them are like accurate to how it should look, based on like the science. And even the wormhole, like the wormhole being a sphere is like a big thing, because wormholes in movies are always like these just kind of like circle doorways in space. And like Thorne is like, no, it has to be a sphere. And so they actually like plugged in all these numbers of how the light would refract and stuff. And so like when you watch these things, you're like watching, like you're actually like watching math and science like be visualized to like the best it can be visualized.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And I have a book recommendation for those who want to go down the black hole rabbit trail.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know these. I think it's. I want to say it's Oxford Press, but they're called A Very Short Introduction.
Okay. Yeah.
Have you seen these?
I think so.
They have them on like almost any topic you can think of.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have.
And so one Christmas, I got a very short introduction to black holes.
Yeah.
And so you can I mean, they're like $7 or $8. It's a real small little book. And it's just sort of a primer on any given topic.
Right.
And so I got one on black holes. So if you want to learn a little more, I've read it, but that stuff is so like far beyond me. It's like, okay, I guess that's how it works. I don't know. Like, I guess I'll take their word for it.
I've read Stephen Hawking's A Brief History in Time, and it's like I can grasp a lot of it, but then like there's certain points where it's like, man, this is a little bit beyond me.
Yeah, it's like
it's actually a pretty readable book. A Brief History in Time is. But I think Hawking's later work gets a little bit out there, but A Brief History in Time is pretty like solid, like science. Cool. But yeah, it's I just love how that. So like they have these visualizations of this, and then they really like all the CG work that they're doing, making these visualizations. Instead of like adding all of that in post, they're like projecting it on those screens. So I just really love that because when you hear like the actors talk about it, both like when you hear them talk about being on this like actual like set that is the ship, and like having this physical like reality that you're in, and then at the same time they're like, when you see the black hole out of the window in front of you, like it's so you have something to work off of. And like so I think Anne Hathaway was saying like when me and Matthew like see the black hole for the first time, it's a genuine reaction of like awe, because we actually are seeing this projection of the closest thing to a visualization of a black hole we've ever had before. Like we're seeing it for the first time, and it's incredible. And so like it not only is it like more tangible and real, but like it actually like helps your actors actually act, instead of having to like just imagine what it might look like because they're working with green screen,
I just can't imagine anything more like harmful to the acting experience than like having to just use a green screen or just pretend that like you're seeing like that. I just feel like that'd be so hard to do as an actor.
For sure.
And so another great reason to do everything as practically as you can and do very little green screen.
Yeah. And I mean they put a ton of work to this, like so these images, they're plugging in tons and tons of like math, like real math into this computer program. And it I think they were saying that like it would take like 100 hours to render like one frame. Because it was so complicated what they were doing.
That's insane.
Yeah. And then the other like complicated thing that they did was the Tesseract at the end. And so like obviously it's that they explain it in the movie. It's like this basically 3-dimensional rendering of like 4 dimensions. And so that he can like move within a 3-dimensional space, but he's moving through time. Basically it like makes time one of the 3 dimensions. is basically like what that tesseract is doing at the end.
Yeah.
And it actually it was explained in one of the special features, and I was like, oh, that kind of like helps me grasp it. They were saying like, imagine like unfolding a cube until it's like 2 dimensions. So you kind of end up with like 6 squares basically once you unfold a cube all the way. And so now you have this like 2-dimensional rendering of a 3-dimensional object. And so they said it's basically that, but imagine unfolding 4 dimensions into 3, and what that would be like. And so like, obviously we can't grasp that, but having the analogy helps to be like, okay, well, at least I have like the level down understanding of what that means. But yeah, so the set that they built for that tesseract was like this huge, like 100-foot by 60-foot set of this like kind of like refracted and like distorted room version of like Murph's room. And they did all this like plugging in math and stuff into these computer rendering programs so that they could like stretch out the room and like connect the rooms and make sure that they tried their best to like get it as close to what would mathematically make sense as they could. But obviously this is like the most far-fetched scientifically part of the movie. Like you know, Thorne was basically told Nolan, like, you know, everything, all this stuff we have with like the wormhole and the black hole, like is like really close. He said, but really, like, once you go into the black hole, you can really kind of just do whatever you want because we just don't know. And there's no way for us to know. And so like this
which is great for a movie maker.
Yeah, exactly. Now I can just use my imagination. And really, like, the tesseract is like a really like beautiful thing to look at. It's like strange and like it is a little confusing just because it's something beyond like what we can really kind of comprehend. But like it really is like a beautiful thing to see. And they built the set, and then they used, I think they had like 15 projectors running simultaneously, like projecting all this stuff going on. And
which again is crazy because like I feel like this, if anything could be done like in post and like you can just figure it out, you would think it would be this.
Exactly. But it's another example. So they did a lot of wire work with Matthew McConaughey on this, of like moving them around on cables and stuff within this little set. And it's another example of like he talked about how he was like able to grasp better what was actually happening by being like in it than if he were just like moving around like in a green screen. Like another, like, you're helping your actor like produce like better acting.
For sure.
This you know, there's a ton more in production stuff that we could go on and on about, but we have to get to the release, which it released in November 2014. I didn't remember that it released that late in the year, but it did. And it actually came in $10 million under budget, which is another reason that Nolan has such power in studios, because he stretches his budget. And like, what directors like coming in under budget? Like, that's a good way to get a studio to like fund you again, is to come in under budget, I think. But he and then yet again another like Nolan pulling his power card. Paramount at this point had switched to like delivering movies fully digitally, and Nolan like got them to make an exception for him so that he could deliver celluloid for his distribution. Of course. It opening weekend, $47 million it made domestic. which is that's a good opening weekend. It was second to Big Hero 6 that weekend. I noted. I was like, what was it second to? And I was like, oh, Big Hero 6. Disney movie.
Yeah. Of course.
But yeah, it did eventually gross 700 million worldwide, which is really impressive for this sort of movie to make that much money.
Yeah.
Like,
because it's not a real like broad appeal.
It's not Batman, it's not
a
superhero movie, and it's not like, I guess like it's helped because it's a drama, and dramas tend to do better with a worldwide audience. But
I think,
yeah, it is a strange movie being a sci-fi movie to like make that much money, because that's a huge like
that's a lot
gross for a movie.
I don't know how that compares to other things, but like that seems like a lot.
Well, yeah, so like I mean, The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises both grossed over $1 billion. Inception was up there. It wasn't $1 billion, I don't think, but it was up there. But yeah, I mean, this making 700 million worldwide is really, really impressive.
No kidding.
And it's one of those. What's funny is it's one of the Nolan movies that feels like it has the most like mixed like reviews, like of how people like it. So it's either like there's people that are like, I love this movie, like I guess both of us, or there's like kind of people that are mixed to negative. They're like, oh, it's impressive, but also like they have a lot of issues with it. And so
I think didn't it also have like, wasn't there like complaints about it being too loud?
Yeah.
Was this if I remember correctly, like when it was in theaters, it was like I couldn't hear the dialogue.
Yeah, I think that all started with Bane in Dark Knight Rises, and then like the next like I don't know, several movies Nolan's making up through Tenet is like people are like, I can't hear his dialogue, which is fun. We talked about, me and my guest for Inception had talked about how it's fun. He had pointed out it's funny because in Inception, people were like complaining like, oh, there's too much exposition. They're just talking. And then so like for the next like 4 or 5 movies, Nolan makes movies where you can't hear the dialogue better. And people are like, oh, we can't hear any of the talking. You're like, well, what do you want? Do you want to hear it or not? But yeah, a lot of people found like a lot of like the critical response was kind of like perplexed by his sudden turn to like this very sentimental movie, because it is at the end of the day a pretty sentimental movie.
Very sentimental,
and in that way very different than really most of his other films up to this point, which are very like highly structured like puzzles, kind of unraveling it with like and so they're perplexed by that. But when Nolan heard that, I wrote down this quote. He said that he was an optimist, and this is a quote. He said, I worry about things, but at the same time, I have a lot of faith in people coming together to solve problems. So it's just funny. Like Nolan makes all these movies about like men like racked with like guilt and all this, but he's like, no, I'm an optimist, I promise. And I guess this is like his one movie, or I guess like this and Dunkirk maybe are both like his most optimistic, hopeful movies, which I appreciate that. But yeah, it won 1 Oscar. It won for visual effects, which it very much deserves, I think. It didn't win for score. It was nominated for original score, sound mixing, sound editing, and production design.
I'm surprised. Do you know what won that year for score?
I don't know. Let's see. So 2014 Oscars.
Be curious what
Yeah, I am too. I should have looked this up beforehand, but we're going to get a live search.
Yes.
Okay, so I need to look at 2015. The 2015 awards, because this came out 2014. Here we go. Can you just give me all of the stuff? I don't want the highlights. There we go. Okay, I'm scrolling. This is fantastic content.
Was it Grand Budapest Hotel?
It's Grand Budapest, and which, man, I love that one too. So
I have see. This is the difference because I could not tell you what the score. Like I couldn't.
Yeah.
I have no idea what I have an idea of what Wes Anderson music sounds like, and so it's probably something quirky and peppy and upbeat.
Yeah,
but I couldn't tell you at all what that score was, which is surprising to me. That beat out Hans Zimmer.
Yeah, it's close for me. I would probably.
I don't know.
I would probably go with Interstellar if you made me pick one. But yeah, I mean, Alexander Desplat was nominated for 2 scores that year. He was also nominated for The Imitation Game. He's just like pumping out great scores, I guess.
I need to check out his discography.
Yeah, he's got a lot of great scores. Yeah, I do like the Grand Budapest score a lot. I'll
have to check it out.
It's one that I'll find myself kind of like, I kind of have a mind that I'll like have random melodies just kind of pop into my mind, and I'll walk around like whistling or humming them. And especially when I was doing my Wes Anderson series, that one would like pop in my head a lot, and I would be like walking around humming stuff from it. So, but yeah,
well, I'll have to go back and listen to that. But I'm extremely biased and shocked that it beat out Hans Zimmer.
If I had to pick one, I would probably go with Zimmer's Interstellar score, I guess. But I do like the Grand Budapest one a lot. So I can totally understand. At least it wasn't some like score that I'm like, what? Why that?
Yeah.
But yeah. As far as the cast goes for this, it's actually like not a ton of. Nolan up to this point had a lot of like collaborations that he would use with actors, and this one really has like a lot of new faces. So I think Anne Hathaway and Michael Caine are really the main returners. Anne Hathaway was in Dark Knight Rises previous to this film, but really everybody else is pretty new. I don't really think any of these actors or actresses were in any of his other movies. Not the main ones anyway. Yeah, McConaughey was perfect, I think. Nolan said he liked his everyman quality, which he definitely has. The Texas drawl helps with that, I think.
Yeah.
Actually,
I mean, go ahead.
Oh, I said I actually was half wanted to like open the podcast with like, all right, this is the Establishing Shot podcast. But I didn't want my impression to be so good that people got their hopes up that Matthew McConaughey was actually on the podcast. So I didn't go.
Probably for the best that you didn't do that.
Yeah. Matthew McConaughey with a cold. That's my excuse if my impression was bad. Yeah. You like McConaughey in this, I assume.
Yeah, I do. I think it's perfect. I think he just nails it. Like, I think it's one of his best performances.
I agree. It might be his best performance. Good.
Yeah, it's really good. Big fan.
Yeah, I have to like wonder like what is his process for like crying because, like, man, does he look good crying on camera. Like, how do you get like that? How do you nail that down? I'm so curious. Like,
I don't know, man. He's a master at,
yeah.
I mean, I just think he's a fantastic actor in general. And it's interesting because I've listened to a few interviews with him before, and how he transitioned away from just, because he was just the rom-com guy for so long, and like I think he took quite a few years off because he was just like, I'm not doing rom-coms anymore.
Yeah.
And everybody was like, oh yeah, sure, okay.
Yeah.
But like, sure enough, like he was kind of reinventing himself, and like he is just like, man, he has done some great stuff.
Oh yeah.
And I think this is one of his best films.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and he just feels like the kind of guy that like would feel like in awe about just like everyday stuff. And so like you put a black hole in front of him and it's like, man, you're really going to get like a guy that's like, wow, yeah. Like,
yeah,
that sort of thing.
Well, he's so enthusiastic about
he's
life.
Yeah, and about everything. Like, even like mundane stuff, it seems.
Yeah, and like even just the cornfield scene of, he and his kids chasing down the drone, and like he has a lot of optimism, and just wonder about his character, I think. And I think that's, part of, I think, what draws you into his character. And really, and I think
that comes out of just like his personality, like who he is, like naturally. That's the impression I get, like when I watch him in interviews. He just seems like
he has a sort of magnetic quality. I think it's like in real life, and then obviously I think in this movie as well, this character. So yeah, there's something real understated, I think, about him, because he's got that Texas draw in the movie, and he just like, you don't expect him to be this like rocket scientist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you're like, oh, like it just seems like, he's just kind of this rancher guy.
Yeah.
But yet he can do all this crazy stuff with.
He hates farming.
Yeah. So there's that sort of like unexpected talent, I guess, that he has for flying ships and just doing really smart math stuff, which is kind of cool.
I really like him. I think Anne Hathaway is good in this movie. So she's like, so Dark Knight Rises, I think she's like has an incredible performance in that movie. Like I think she might be my favorite performance in that whole movie. In this one, I feel like she's just like fine. It seems like,
well, her character is quite cold, I think, if I recall.
Yeah, she is, but she's also like, she has these very like vulnerable emotional moments. I don't know. There's something about it that like doesn't quite work fully for me, but it's not like, I don't know. This is just like a slight nitpick, maybe. It doesn't really like ruin the character or anything for me. It's just like, sometimes I'm like, she's really putting it on strong in a way that, like, probably putting it on as strong as Matthew McConaughey is in some scenes, but like not quite fully selling it as well as he does. And maybe it's just that comparison of seeing him do it and seeing her do it, which like maybe in a different movie with a different character, she would it would flip flop and she would be the one doing it better. But
and I feel like too, you're also meant to, like, you have so much more invested in McConaughey's character.
That's true, yeah.
As well, so it's like she's sort of a relatively new character. And so I think, you're maybe not supposed to really be sold as much.
Yeah. One of the funny things to me about this is like imagining like being a kid and being Timothée Chalamet and then like waking up one day and you look like Casey Affleck instead. It's like, well, how did that happen? Like,
it's like, wow,
how'd you go from this guy to this guy?
I forgot that it was Timothée Chalamet.
Yeah. It's one of his like first roles ever.
That's why I don't even know that I realized it was him.
Yeah.
Even the last time I watched it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Timothy, and then Mackenzie Foy plays the young Mirth, and I think she's like so good.
Yeah, she's great.
Because you're really like building the emotional foundation between her and McConaughey as, you know, Cooper and Murph in that first part of the movie, and like it's done. That's what
carries you through.
Yeah, it is. It carries you through the whole movie, and even like Jessica Chastain is like really great here too, I think. And I love her as an actress. But like without that performance of like the young Murph, like it wouldn't work. Like it still is like so dependent on that.
Yeah, it's all based on that original relationship.
Yeah, and I've heard some like people complain about like the character building. Like really Cooper is the only character and maybe Murph a little bit. They're really like actually fully developed character, and the character building is bad. And I'm just like, I kind of understand that take, but also like I feel like the character building in that first part of the movie is so strong that you really don't have to do a whole lot the rest of the movie for character building. Because like even like Amelia, like Anne Hathaway's Dr. Brand, like you get everything you really need to know about her by like her interactions with the young Murph at NASA and her like interactions with Cooper when you know, at NASA. Like you kind of like everything you really need to know about her like is built in that first like opening section. So I don't know. I kind of get that complaint, but at the same time, I kind of disagree with it. You know?
Yeah, I would disagree with it. I mean, I think the character building is spot on, and I think the ones the attention and the focus of the characters is on the right ones. You know, and it's obvious that you can like the ones who have less character building, like there's just not a need for them to be, I don't think. And so like I just think that would kind of be wasted time.
Yeah. Matt Damon, famously like not credited on the movie, kind of like a surprise appearance when it first came out. But I think he's really great in it.
Also. He's so like, he's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Yeah. Like his character is interesting too.
For sure. And yeah, he I've heard before, I want to say is Josh Larson from the Film Spotting podcast was saying like he really likes Matt Damon and Leo DiCaprio when they're playing like Weasley guys kind of the most.
Yeah.
And so like he really liked him as Dr. Mann in this movie because he is kind of playing that like Weasley kind of like deceptive character.
He's like, I'm just trying to get off this rock.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of like names in this, like John Lithgow as the father-in-law, Ellen Burstyn as the old Murph. You have Topher Grace in this movie.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, David Oyelowo, who's a great actor. He's the school principal. He's in it for like 3 minutes, you know. And so like, I mean, to pull a guy like him just to like be in the movie for 3 minutes is crazy. But
that's wild.
Yeah, great cast. I really enjoy the cast. And I think really like Matthew McConaughey, like if it was if he was the only good cast member in this movie, it would be worth it to me because he's so good.
For sure. Well, Michael Caine,
Michael Caine is great too. Yeah,
he's always,
and it's funny because like in most Nolan movies, he's kind of like the emotional backbone, and in this movie, like he kind of tricks you because he feels like he's being that again, but like he's actually the like lying, deceptive one in this one. So it's kind of like a trick, an actor casting trick.
It was, and he tricked us all.
He did. Rage against imagine like being Murph, older Murph, and like trying to know like if your dad abandoned you on purpose, and then he's saying this stupid poem again. You're like, shut up with the poem, like tell me if my dad left me on purpose or not.
Did he know?
She's like genuinely like, did he know, and he's like quoting this poem again. I just thought that was like it was kind of comical to me in my I guess weird sense of humor. But I guess like getting into just like some key things in this movie, one of the things that I think this movie does so well is these like kind of cross-cutting montages that it does. I think the first time like it happens masterfully really is after Cooper has had his like kind of goodbye with Murph, kind of like lack thereof, but he's it's this cross-cutting of him like leaving the farmhouse and driving away with the camera, mounted on the side of the truck, looking back at the house. It's cross-cutting between that and like the launch of the rocket for them to go on their mission. And it's really just this like genius way of making that transition, because I feel like most movies would like spend all this time like with like, oh, they're training and they're like preparing for their mission and all this. And they're like, no, forget that. We're going to use this as like this kind of like symbolic, like, and
it's another like sort of emotional bomb.
Exactly.
Nolan dropping, it's like, he's leaving the farm, but then he's also like leaving the planet.
It's this like, and it's like you hear the countdown as he's like driving away, and it's like cross cutting between the rocket launching and the truck driving away. It's counting down.
That's
and it's really just like, it's like, man, this is like whoever came up with this idea is like, that's genius. Like, because it's so powerful, emotionally, because it makes his driving away in the truck even that much more like, it gives it that much more gravity, because you're also like blasting off in a rocket into the depths of space,
well, and you keep like, I can't remember, like, she never comes out of the house, does she?
She does. When he's like too far away, she runs out.
Okay.
But he's already like,
I feel like you were kind of anticipating that in the beginning, and boy,
and you get the close-ups. I think it's the first like crying McConaughey face you get, and it's like, oh man, it gets me. It's like,
oh dude, because I watched this, when it came out, and didn't have kids then, but then we watched it again, like maybe I think it's been within the last year, maybe. And it is like, boy, when you like having kids and watching this movie is like an entirely different trip than if you don't have kids and watch it. And it's just like, man, it gets you like right in the gut.
And it got me in the gut back in 2014 when I was still single, like and it like now when I watch it, it's like, man, it gets,
but it's just like 10x whatever you felt the first time. It's like, whoa.
And it really is this this, I think it's so powerful because it gets at this thing that like I think maybe parents don't express a whole lot, and it's that feeling of having this pull within your heart of these like grand things that you want to do and accomplish, and feel like you're made to do, and then like, but at the same time having your heart pulled toward like investing everything in your kids.
Yeah.
And it's this like, it's this, you know, you have to make these compromises in your life of like how much time do I invest here and how much here, like it's this like struggle like that really is like it's in every parent of like what is like my grand desire and thing that I feel like is my purpose in life. And then you have kids and it's like you have kind of two purposes, and you're kind of you feel a lot pulled in two directions. And you know, and I think it doesn't get talked about and expressed a lot because you kind of feel guilty for saying like, I don't want to invest every ounce of my being into my kids, because you actually do. But you also like want to invest every part of your being into this calling that you feel made to do. And it's this like, I don't know. And I think Nolan understands that so well. And that really is part of the emotional core of this movie.
And I think you see that in like his working title of Flora's Letter.
And
it's like, of course, as a filmmaker at his level, like he's going to be feeling that. And like, I'm sure it probably feels like I've never made a feature film, but I would think it probably feels like being on a different planet for 6 months or 8 months or however long it takes to make it, and post-production, and like you're consumed with it for a huge chunk of time. And you're missing out, you know, on your family that whole time.
For sure.
And so I think especially in that context, I think it's very relatable. This sort of like, you feel like you've blasted off into another planet. You know, thankfully, you know, the filmmakers do get to go back to their families before they age too much. But yeah, that is true. I mean, I think that's a struggle I think that every parent has to navigate, you know, and it's not easy.
Yeah, and I think it works so well too in the context of the film, because what he's doing is both like leaving his daughter behind, but also like giving her a future at the same time. It's this like weird dilemma of emotions. Like if I stay, I can be with my daughter, but she maybe won't have a future. But if I leave, I don't get to be with my daughter, but maybe she'll have a future. It's like
the daughter. Of course, the daughter doesn't care.
Yeah,
like,
it doesn't
care about all that. Like, just stay. Like,
right, and that's what he tells Brand in space. She's like, you know, couldn't you just tell her that you are going to save the world? And he says no. Like, because then that means like I'm having to tell my daughter like the world is ending, and I want her to feel safe. Like, there's and then like there's the lines about like being once you become a parent, you're the ghost of your children's future, is just like really like such great writing. Like, really powerful. There's a lot of like really powerful lines in this movie that are so well written.
We used to stare at the stars, and now we just look at the dirt, or however it goes.
Great lines.
Yeah, there's some really great lines. For sure.
Yeah. And I did write down too another like cross-cutting sequence where you have like Dr. Mann and Cooper fighting on the ice planet. You're like cross-cutting between that and then Murph trying to save her brother's like wife and kids.
Yeah.
By like burning the corn to distract Tom, and
yeah,
and it's just like it's so purposeful. It's not just like to be efficient with your like filmmaking, but it's like so purposeful because you have these two instances of people fighting against not just a person but a way of thinking, to like to save humanity, like to push, like in one case like it's like all of humanity, and in the other case it's just this very personal, like these three people. And it kind of shows like how both are important, too, what the cross-cutting between those two, because Cooper is fighting against this way of thinking to save, you know, the grand scale of humankind, and she's fighting against her brother's way of thinking to just save his wife and one kid, these two people. And both are like equally as important, which I think the cross-cut editing kind of emphasizes, in a way, which is kind of like movie making magic sort of stuff, like the sort of storytelling that you really like can really emphasize in a movie that is hard to do in other like art forms, I guess.
I think that's what's so great about movie making is you can tell stories in those kind of ways. Like it's just such a fascinating tool for storytelling.
Absolutely.
You can do things like those crosscuts where you're like, you're letting the audience know something without telling them.
Right.
And I think a lot of times that, you know, a lot of those things get missed, I think. But,
and a lot of times, like, if you're watching it, you're, you know, Nolan even says about this movie, like, figuring out all the science stuff isn't that important. It's just, it's about the experience and experiencing the movie. And, you know, I think a lot, even like this emotional and like thematic stuff, a lot of times, like, it's just kind of like washing over you. Like you're not necessarily like thinking about that in the moment, but you feel it in the moment. And I think that's what's important. And that's what I think. I
think what's like the thing about the movie is not so much like all the technicalities and like, what does a black hole actually do? And you can, like, you kind of like, you need to accept that, like, hey, this is a projection of what somebody thinks could happen. Move on and realize that the more important thing is like all those emotions that you're feeling in that journey that they're trying to take you on. And I think he just, he nails all that. Like, and I think that's where the heart of the film is.
Yeah. And when you finish this movie, like you're really not thinking about like, oh, how cool was that black hole? How cool did that look? Like you really are left thinking about like, those emotional things, like the connection of him and his daughter.
All you're thinking about is him and his daughter. And just how gut-wrenching that whole thing is.
Absolutely. I still do think it's like, it is interesting to think through like all the paradoxes of, you know, well, who are the future humans? Like, how would the future humans be there to like give them this wormhole if like they weren't, like humanity wasn't saved in the first place? And it's kind of like these like time paradox stuff. Like that's all fun to think about, but ultimately like isn't like the focus or that like all that important to if the film works or not. To me anyway. We've already really kind of talked about some of the common critiques of this. Like, you know, a lot of people think that the exposition is too much. I think it works, because to me, like all the science exposition in the film kind of helps you like feel the stakes, and then like bringing it all back around to like the theme of love in the movie to like, I don't know, it works for me. if it doesn't work for someone, I guess like it doesn't work. Like there's not really anything you can do about that. Like,
So
there's the people that are like, oh, don't tell me, show me. And it's like, well, like, how do you expect them to show you all this, like these scientific theories? Like they have to explain it, And like that's what scientists like to do anyway. They like to explain their theories. So like it still is true to reality in that way. Just like, I don't know, is there anything like that when you think about this movie thematically that like really like stands out to you? Like when you reflect on Interstellar, what is it like? What is the theme that like really resonates and like lasts in your mind?
Well, I think like obviously love,
right?
And like that parental love that just sort of spans the gulf of space and time. Like that's obviously one. I think the other one though is this idea, I think, of like isolation. So like with Dr. Mann's character, and just how self-absorbed he becomes. And I think, potentially any one of us would become, or were we in his situation. It's like, okay, I in some ways can't blame the guy. And so like you sort of see like the best and worst of humanity, I feel like, in this movie.
And it's funny because you can kind of compare him and Gyasi's character who plays Romilly, I think is his name in the movie, the black actor that's the scientist on the Endurance. He's the one that's like up on the ship for 23 years while they're on a water planet for like an hour. He like he's been up there for 23 years and like, but he's not as like egotistical obviously as Dr. Mann was. Like, so Dr. Mann's like on his planet scheming to like commandeer whoever comes to save him's ship and like leave them for dead. And like Romilly's up there like for his 23 years, like he's like, well, I didn't want to sleep my life away, so I got all this data from the black hole. And like he just wasn't like an egotistical guy, and so like what he did that time was different. So that's an interesting contrast. That like what you were saying,
just the idea of isolation and how that, what does that do to people?
What does it bring out in you? And like I think too, like both of those are not like self-imposed isolations necessarily. Like obviously they made choices that led to that they knew was possible. But like one, I think hope is a big factor too, because I think Dr. Mann had just like lost hope for really like saving humanity, and like Romilly's up there and he's just like, he seems to have like still trying to hold on to hope that they were going to come back, sort of thing. I think that maybe comes into play too.
But I mean, it is a real hopeful, despite all the sadness. I mean, it is a hopeful movie.
I would say it's Nolan's most hopeful movie of all of his movies. And it's one of those things where like it's definitely a sci-fi movie, but like doesn't feel a whole lot like, other than like all the space stuff, doesn't feel like a sci-fi movie to me.
Right.
Because like my style of sci-fi that I love is like way more open-ended, and this is like very like tightly packaged, like with the ending and everything. Like there's no question of what what happened. Like, I mean, obviously you don't know exactly like how things are going to end up, but it's pretty like as tightly packaged and like with a bow on top as you can get with the ending of a sci-fi movie.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Which with some sci-fi movies would like frustrate me. Like I would be like, no, I like the open-ended stuff. Which I do with a lot of sci-fi, but yeah, with this one, it just works for me on kind of all levels for some reason.
Yeah. No, me too.
Yeah, one of the things I had written down was like the desire and need to like explore, and then the cost of that. I think it's talked about some in the movie, and it's Nolan. Like one of the things I ran across was Nolan talking about wanting to push back on this like earthbound technology that makes our lives easier. So Nolan like notoriously like has like no email address and no cell phone, and he's like he tries to push back on just like these. He like, I like that idea of earthbound technologies. Like he's trying to push back on that, and he's trying to like instead like inspire individuals to like push boundaries of what we can do and where we can go and that sort of thing. And I thought that was like an interesting thing to think about. Like that's definitely like there in this movie. And I think Emma Thomas, his wife and the producer, was one of the things she was saying was like she hopes kids will like see this movie and, you know, be inspired to like travel in space and stuff, or like, you know, or at least like be inspired to like push the boundaries of what we can do, sort of thing. Which I think is a cool thing to be thinking of when you're making a movie, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, love as like an interdimensional force is definitely like, I think, the big thing in this movie. It's like the core of everything going on. Which
totally.
I really think it's cool, like, because at one point I think Brand is saying something. She's expressing like, well, love is quantifiable and observable. And I was like thinking about that, and I was like, she's kind of right. Like you can scientifically observe love because you can observe it and like quantify it to a certain degree of like, because at the end of the day, like love is the choices you make and like where your focus lies and what you invest your time in. And in a way, like it is like quantifiable, like to a certain degree. But then there's like, I think there's like this question of like, is love like this scientific law that's like beyond our understanding? And I think in that way, like that mixed with like this grand organ score, like recorded in a church, makes this like probably Nolan's most like religious or spiritual or transcendent movie, I guess you could say. Like I don't think Nolan's like all that religious himself. But this movie is definitely his most like, I would say like religious or transcendent, or however you want to put it, for sure.
I would agree. I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like most of Nolan's movies are like head first, heart second. And then this movie comes along and he kind of like readjusts on that a little bit and kind of says, well, yeah, maybe head first, heart second, but the head should be like serving the heart.
Well, this is mostly heart.
Yeah, it is.
I feel like, I mean,
and it even plays out like in the plot when they're deciding on what planet to go to, because Cooper like pushes back on Brand wanting to go to Dr. I think it's Wolf or something like that, his planet, because he feels like, oh, she's just making the emotional decision. We need to make the head decision. Well, in that case, like the head decision was wrong and the emotional one was right. So it's he's kind of like pushing back on, I guess, maybe some of his own tendencies maybe at least in his filmmaking, of like making things too head first, heart second. But I really do like that idea of, you know, the head serving the heart in a way. Because I think we are, we have these different parts of who we are as humans, and our mind and our heart can be like at odds sometimes and work together sometimes. But I think there's a degree to which like a lot of Nolan's movies kind of have pushed back on the over emotionalization of society. And I think this is his movie of like showing, but hey, I have a heart too. You know?
Yeah. I too am human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just getting the final thoughts. I always like to do just kind of a final thought or takeaway that I was thinking about after watching the movie. And I was thinking about that final scene with McConaughey and old Murph. Cooper and Murph finally reunited, and it was like, it's this instance where like you kind of like you want to sit there for a while with them. And then she's like, no, you've got to go. And he's kind of just like, okay, I guess you're right, sort of thing. And like, no, I want another like 30 minutes of movie with them, reuniting. And I was just thinking about that, and like, I don't know, like, I was just thinking about, so like there's, when he first wakes up and when he's come back out of the black hole, I guess like the future humans like spit him back out of the black hole, I guess.
Movie magic.
And yeah, he's floating there. And gets picked up by the station, and he's Murph has worked out all the equations that he was able to send from the black hole and the Tesseract, which I think is a really cool, like, it's not really a twist, but it is kind of like I guess more of like a aha moment, like, he was the ghost.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
I think it's really cool.
Harkens back to that line of like, when you become a parent, you're now like a ghost of your children's future, sort of thing. And I was just like reflecting on all of that, and how like, he wakes up and he's like, oh, wow. And they're like, yeah, this is Cooper Station. He's like, oh, they named it after me. And he's like, no, this is named after Murph Cooper. And like, there's this like moment where you can kind of see on McConaughey's face, there's like a very, very, like a millisecond of disappointment. And then like it all like that gets washed over with like pride. Which is something that like you can really only fully understand, like being a parent, is like the pride of seeing, like, knowing that your child has like accomplished something really like incredible. Is like really, and it like, it really does, like, in his expression, wash away, like, and just like decimates that feeling of disappointment that you can kind of see for half a second, and it's just that idea of like everything we do, every little decision we make, being so vital and important for just like our kids, but future generations in general. And like, it's like this thing that's like very like weighty and like astronomical responsibility can feel like, if you think about it too much. But like, I don't know, just like at the same time, even like the mistakes that you make, like obviously like when he's in the Tesseract, he just like wishes he could be back and stay and not go. And to him, that feels like a mistake, but also like it was so vitally important. And I think that's why that like just very short moment between Cooper and the older Murph is so powerful, because there's this like unspoken understanding there of all that. It's like this moment of like forgiveness and reconciliation and pride, and you know, that it all goes back to like that loving connection that like you know, exceeds space and time. And like it's just it really is like a beautiful, powerful moment where like the child like knows that like all of the hurt and confusion was worth it in the end, and like him knowing the same thing and then being able to like look at each other and understand that. And I think that is something you struggle with as a parent. Like, what am I instilling in my children? Like the good and the bad. And like, will they like thank me and like, be like proud of me for the good, and will they be able to forgive me for the bad? Is like, I don't know. I think about that stuff like constantly, you know, and like to have that moment with your child who's like now like older and wiser than you are, which is a whole nother thing. Like sometimes my 4-year-old says stuff and you're like, wow, you're like more wise than I am, you know, already.
Yeah, 4-year-olds can be shockingly insightful.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. No, I've experienced that.
Yeah. And so I think there's a whole lot packed into that like short moment that is so powerful and and inspiring, and like just like it really does instill like hope in my heart that like even like all the mistakes can be turned like to good. And like I just really like that moment. And you know, it gave me hope, that it gives you hope for human, like not just like it's that juxtaposition of like a hope for humanity in general, but also like a hope for you and your family specifically. So yeah, I just love that.
It's such a great ending, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's a good way to end the movie.
Yeah. And we're going to end our discussion of Interstellar with it, too.
Yeah. I think that's a great spot to
so we already really said like this is our favorite Nolan film. So, you know, not really much to discuss there. I will say Dunkirk. I love Dunkirk. But man, the emotion of this one wins out for me. And
it's like none other. Yeah, I think.
I think the emotion in Dunkirk is pretty powerful too, in a different way. But this one just.
Well, this is. I mean, you know, it's like it's in some ways it's a love letter to humanity, but more specifically a love letter to parents, I think. You know, like that parent-child relationship that just, I think he totally nails everything. And it's like, and I think that's what makes it so powerful.
For sure. Yeah. Well, next week we're going to do Dunkirk. I mentioned it a few times, and I've already recorded that episode, and it's going to be a good episode. So excited for everyone to hear that next week. But yeah, we're finishing up Interstellar, my favorite Christopher Nolan movie. It's bittersweet moving on from it, but yeah, we're gonna take a quick break, and we'll be back after the break with a space movies draft. So hang around, and we will see you in just a second. Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on the Establishing Shot today. We hope you're enjoying the episode so far, and we hope you'll stick around for the segments we have coming up after this quick break. But during this break, I wanted to tell you how you can get more involved with the Establishing Shot podcast. There are several ways you can do this. The main way you can do it is by going to establishingshotpod.com, our website where you can find all sorts of information like episodes with the show notes on there, information about our guests for each episode. You can find reviews there. And there's a page where you can actually leave a review on the website if you want to. You can see all the platforms where the podcast is available, like Apple, Spotify, all the major podcast platforms, and even a link to our YouTube page where you can see a video version of the podcast. So please go to the website. And the place I want to highlight there is our donate page, which has information about our Establishing Shot family. This is a way that you can subscribe to the podcast to support all the efforts and the stuff that goes into making this podcast good and making it better than it even is now. We have different tiers that you can subscribe to, starting at $5. And what this will do is you'll be able to support the podcast, help me make it better, and also at the same time, you'll get early and ad-free episodes. You'll get access to our Discord server where you can join in and just kind of talking about movies with a community that loves film. And so we would love to have you in there. And then the higher up in the tiers you go, the more you get. Even things like chats and video chats that we'll do every once in a while where we get to talk about in more detail stuff that we're talking about on the podcast. So I hope you'll subscribe to that. Choose a tier that fits your budget, and I would love for you to support the podcast in that way. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is where you can find us on social media. You can find me personally on Twitter at @TheEliPrice, and you can also follow me on Letterboxd. Letterboxd is kind of like a social media for movie reviews, so you can read my reviews there, and you can find me there at just Eli Price, no spaces or anything. So I'm on Twitter and Letterboxd. You can find the podcast on all the social platforms as well, such as Twitter at eShotPod, and then on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok at Establishing Shot Pod. So make sure to follow us so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments about the episode or about the podcast, you can always email us at establishingshotpod@gmail.com. And the very last thing I want to do before you get back into the episode today is just ask you to please go to Spotify and Apple and leave some ratings and reviews. That really helps the visibility of the podcast and gets it in more people's podcast feeds. And so we hope you will do that for us, and we would greatly appreciate it. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode, and I will see you next time on the Establishing Shot podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Eli Price here with Sam Camp, and we just wrapped up our discussion of Interstellar, both of our favorite Nolan films, and maybe your favorite Nolan film too now, I hope. But if not, there's a lot of great ones to choose from. So, but yeah, this, I don't have much as far as movie news goes. I am interested to see Sofia Coppola's new movie, Priscilla, which is coming out the weekend this is releasing. And I don't know a ton about the movie except that it's directed by Sofia Coppola, and it's the Elvis story, but from Priscilla's perspective, which should be interesting, especially right after getting an huge Elvis movie. Having this other one, I don't know. It'll be interesting. Have you heard much about this movie, or
I've just seen I'm aware of it, but that's about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. I don't know much about it other than like what it's about. And I think generally Sofia Coppola makes like pretty good movies, and so it should be good. But yeah, maybe I'll make it to theaters to see it. I don't know. I don't. It's kind of like hit or miss these days with the young kids of being able to get out. But yeah, but we not really much other than that as far as movie news goes. So I think we can just jump right into a draft.
Let's do it.
And we discussed Interstellar, so it's natural that we should draft movies in space. I don't think there's any movies actually in space. We'll see in the draft if there are any movies actually filmed in space. But
I know the ISS has done some time lapses. I don't know if they've made it.
That's true.
Movies, but
yeah, would that be like considered a short film? Maybe. Who knows?
Possibly. Yeah. Probably.
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen any of those. I'll have to look that up. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, they are really cool.
But yeah, I'm ready to jump in. So, usually when I have my guest on for a second time, I switch it up and I'll go first since so this is your second time on the podcast, so you went first the first time, so I'm gonna take the first pick this time.
Go for it.
Unless you're like, no, I must have the first pick. Then
it's all you.
Like, well, you're the guest, so I guess you can. But yeah, it's really hard. So I feel like there's one movie that I feel like obligated to pick first as a movie in space, but I'm not going to. I'm gonna pick a movie that like had very mixed responses when it came out a few years ago, but I just like absolutely loved, and I'm gonna pick James Gray's Ad Astra with Brad Pitt and Tommy Lee Jones. I loved that movie.
I'll strike that one from my list then.
I'm glad it's comforting to know that you had it on your list too, because I feel like it was like a marketing thing. Like they marketed this movie completely wrong to make people think it was like action movie in space, and it's like the opposite of that.
I think I saw this one in theaters.
Yeah, I did too.
I remember really liking it, and so I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, I love the movie. It's
good.
very like it's another instance of like a very personal movie with the huge setting of space.
And just the chase scene on the moon.
Yeah,
that's
the scene
really
that was marketed, and so that's why people thought it was like an action movie.
I know, and it's like,
but that is a good scene.
About a guy and his dad problems, like
yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's good.
Yeah, where are you going to go with your first pick?
All right. Well, I guess I'll just do the obvious and say Interstellar, since we just talked about it. I think it's one of the best space movies for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I don't ever draft like the movie we're talking about. So, but I'm glad you took it because it'll be good. It'll be good for the people.
So.
No, it'll be good for the people to see it, because there's some people that see the draft like on social media but don't like listen to the podcast. Like they don't have the context of like having just talked for hours about Interstellar, and so like they'll be like, oh yeah, Interstellar, and if it's not on there, they're like, why is Interstellar not on there? I'm like, well, because we just talked about it.
It's on there, people.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely Interstellar. That's man. So
all right, where are you gonna go?
Yeah, it's tough because we talked about this movie with the other movie, and I feel like it has to be taken. And you didn't take it, so I'm gonna take it here, I guess, and do 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Mm-hmm. Someone had to.
Yeah, I think it's an incredible movie.
It holds up, like we said. I think
it holds up. It was so it's so influential, and it has like some interesting ideas too, and just like the audacity to like spend like so much camera time just like making you watch something slowly happen in space, and it's still being like engaging, is like all respect to Stanley Kubrick. But yeah, 2001: A Space Odyssey is where I'm going.
Good one. I am then going to go to something a little more grounded and say Apollo 13. Tom Hanks, I think it was 95 when that came out, but it was just like, I don't know, I think it's a great sort of like reality-based space movie.
Yeah, and I don't know. Yeah, so this is like the second time in 3 episodes, that's been drafted, because we did we did a nonfiction movie adaptations draft from nonfiction books. Back on the Inception episode to go with the release of Killers of the Flower Moon, and Elijah drafted Apollo 13 there, and I actually like I have it on my list, but I wasn't going to draft it because I don't think I've seen this movie since I was a kid. And I remember loving it as a kid, but I don't remember it that well. So I was like, well, maybe I'll try to rewatch it before we do the draft, but I just didn't get around to it. So I'm glad you drafted it because I feel like it should be on here, but I didn't feel right drafting it because I hadn't seen it in forever and couldn't really remember a whole lot about it.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen it in forever either, but that didn't stop me from drafting it. So
yeah, I'm glad you did. Yeah, I have a few directions I can go. But I think I'm going to go ahead and pick I'm going to go with Ridley Scott's Alien, the first Alien movie. I think it's an incredible movie.
I'm pretty sure we have like the same list, and we're just seeing who can get to which ones first.
I guess so. I mean, the best space movies, I guess, are just the best space movies. I guess that's just how it goes.
There's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. I can get a little bit more out there on my next picks to maybe help you out, but we'll see.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Where are you going next?
I think what I'll do is another sort of quasi reality based, and that's The Martian.
Okay,
Matt Damon. I really liked that movie. I thought it was cool.
Also Ridley Scott.
Is it? Yeah, that you're right.
2 Ridley Scotts in a row.
There you go. Ridley Scott for the win. Yeah, great movie, and it's one of those that's like, how interesting can a movie about a guy stuck on Mars be?
Yeah,
but turns out it's pretty entertaining, and I think it's kind of, I just think it's a kind of a neat space movie. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure it came out the year after Interstellar, if I'm not mistaken. Interstellar was 2014. I think The Martian was 2015.
That sounds right.
Which makes 2 Matt Damon in space movies in a row, years in a row. So
it was his space era.
Yeah, the Matt Damon space era. Good stuff.
All right.
All right. Okay, so we're only taking 5. So I'm going to go ahead and take one of my favorite documentaries ever, which I kind of hinted at. There actually is a movie with footage in space, technically. And I'm going to pick the documentary from 2019 by Todd Douglas Miller, Apollo 11.
Okay.
It is this movie that this guy so there was all this like archive footage of the Apollo 11 space mission that had been like in the National Archives, and it had just been sitting there and never been used. And they found all this film, and they took it and they like restored all the film, and then they like edited it together with like actual like archive audio back from the mission.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's an incredible documentary because there's not like voiceover explaining like what's going on.
It's all just raw audio.
All archive footage and archive audio, and the way it's edited together is like incredible. And it's like the restoration of the film is like beautiful. You have like there's even like these beautiful shots of like people like parked on the road, on the side of the road, like kind of like picnicking, waiting to watch the launch. That's just like beautiful and like really like cool, and like, and it ends up being like a really inspirational like documentary. Watching all of this, and like you even have like a bunch of footage of them like getting their space suits on, and like obviously you have like footage from the moon landing itself.
Yeah.
And it's actually on Hulu. It's on Hulu, so you can go stream it.
Okay.
On Hulu.
That sounds great though.
Yeah, there was like 2 or 3 years in a row where I would watch it on like the anniversary of the moon landing. But I might try to start that tradition back up again.
Yeah, I totally should.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Fantastic movie.
I'll have to check that out.
I had to make sure I got it on the list for sure.
Yeah. Well, one that I think definitely deserves to be on the list, and that's going to be Wall-E.
Oh, man. I almost did that. I almost picked that my last pick and thought, well, maybe I'll get it coming back around. Nope.
Yeah. So, yeah. Classic space movie.
Yeah.
No explanation needed.
It's a great movie. It
really is.
Wall-E.
It's been a while since I've seen it.
Also, another emotional movie in space.
I know, with robots.
Yeah.
What more do you want?
A somehow like likable cockroach, which that's hard to pull off, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Somehow they did it. Leave it up to Pixar.
Okay. Man, there's a bunch of directions I can go. I have like several movies that I'll just mention in honorable mentions. But I'm gonna go like kind of off the radar probably for most people. And I'm gonna pick a 2007 movie by Danny Boyle called Sunshine. Have you ever heard of this movie? It's got Cillian Murphy, Rose Byrne, Chris Evans, Michelle Yeoh in it.
I don't think I feel like I've heard of this, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah. So it's about this this crew that's piloting the Icarus II to the sun, because the sun has this like, it's in the near, like not too distant future, I think. And the sun has this like some weird thing that happened where it's going to die sooner than it should have. And so they're basically like trying to deliver these payloads of like bombs to launch into the sun to like reset the sun. And it's it's a really interesting movie. It kind of like, it's like sci-fi / like mystery / thriller / like people stuck in a room together, and like like the drama of that kind of movie. It's a really interesting, it's a really great visual movie, because like it's doing something different than a lot of movies do, which is to go farther away from the sun, and this one goes like directly toward it. And so like the way that the colors and the lighting work is interesting, and like the sorts of spacesuits you get are interesting, because like they have to be way overbuilt to endure the sun, being so close to the sun. And so like there's all that stuff, but then too, like, and then it has this like really wild third act. That's one of those things where like either like it loses you when it gets to the third act, or you're like, whoa, this is great. It's like probably one of those love it or hate it third acts. And so
I'll have to check that one out too.
Yeah, it's really good. And Danny Boyle's a very interesting director. You know, he did Train Spotting and 28 Days Later and Slumdog Millionaire, Steve Jobs, like pretty wide ranging director. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Sunshine. So that's kind of my like way out there. Probably most people haven't seen my pick. That's also a recommendation.
Yes. Well, my pick that's sort of somewhat way out there, I feel like, or at least it like probably most people haven't seen, is the movie Solaris. And I think it's the Tarkovsky version, the original.
Yeah.
Because I think it was redone.
Soderbergh redid it. Yeah.
Yeah, with
Clooney.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which I haven't seen that one.
I haven't either.
But I have seen the original, and it's out there. Like it's a weird movie.
It is, yeah.
But I think it's interesting. Tarkovsky, I think it's a really, really interesting filmmaker.
Yeah.
It's not for everyone. I probably
it's Russian
won't watch
language
it again.
For one.
That's true. Yeah. So you need to know Russian.
Yeah.
But once you've learned Russian. Yeah. Well, I guess you could do subtitles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a trip for sure.
Yeah. Tarkovsky has this like, Solaris I love. And I was going to take it, but then I took it, I think back, we did like a draft of American movies and their foreign films and their American remakes. And I think I took it in that draft. So I was like, well, I'll leave it on the board, but I'm glad you took it, because I like this film more than a couple of others on my list. And so like, I like it more, but I was like, well, I'll try to get some different ones out there. But I'm glad you took it, because it's an incredible movie. And like an example of what I was talking about, of like a sci-fi film that's so like open-ended and leaves you with so many questions.
Which I feel like most of Tarkovsky's movies do that. Like,
yeah. And Tarkovsky he's a sort of filmmaker that like his movies are these weird fragmented, like I don't know how to describe. It's hard to describe his movies. They're like, they're not like, there's usually not like this strong narrative structure to his movies, which could take a lot of people out. And they're like these weird fragmented looks at different aspects of what makes us human, or even like what he's like Mirror is like this weird mix of like his memory of his childhood and where he is now, but also like his kind of disillusion with his society and government. And it's like this weird fragmented memory meld of all that stuff. And like it doesn't have like a narrative structure that you can follow. Like Solaris has like at least like a bare bones skeleton of a structure. Like, he's here and he's going here, and that's basically it. And like everything that happens within that journey is like mind bending, like deep into like human psyche stuff.
Yeah. It's a weird one, but it is in space.
It is.
So there you
go. I love Solaris. Man, I guess we can stop at 5 each. And we both ended up doing kind of what I had planned to do, which was to leave Star Wars movies out of the draft because they're just so obvious, and I'm like, I want to get some other stuff in there. So
I had an intention, like, because I thought about this, like, I could do Star Wars, I said, but I just don't feel like that's right. So
yes,
I'm glad we both agreed on that.
Yeah. And I had I think it was before we started back into the recording. I had started to say, oh yeah, I plan not to take any Star Wars, but then I was like, oh, I won't. No, never mind. I'm not going to say. We'll just see what happens in the draft. So we were on the same wavelength there.
Good. I'm glad. Well, we had a lot of the same. I had written down about 8 or 9.
Yeah.
And I think all of those.
Did you have any honorable mentions that we didn't take?
Nope.
Okay. So. All got taken.
Maybe Gravity.
Yeah, Gravity kind of a cool was one of mine.
Just like I think it did some really neat stuff. I think
it did. Yeah.
Like
great use of silence in space in that one.
Yeah.
Aliens is also good. The James Cameron follow up to Alien is I think is really good. I don't like it as much as Alien, but
no, they're totally different movies.
They are. One is a horror movie and one is a action movie.
Yeah.
But I also had
Alien. I think it's really up there as far as like great space. I mean, just great horror.
Oh yeah,
but yeah,
it is. And Ridley Scott was a big influence on Nolan. Nolan loves Ridley Scott, so like I think if pressed, he would probably say Blade Runner is his favorite movie because he talks about Blade Runner so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also had Treasure Planet. I had another animated kind of down my list a little bit.
Okay.
Treasure Planet, I think, is like it's like a underseen, underrated Disney movie. Because it kind of came out in that weird transition from like 2D to 3D animation era of Disney, where most of the movies are kind of like pretty terrible. But this one is like actually really fun and inventive, and it's a play on Treasure Island, obviously. Yeah, it's a fun movie.
That's
it's
cool.
not like I don't think it's like some of the best work Disney's ever done, but it's really fun.
I'll have to check that out.
The other like really interesting one I had on my list was the movie Moon. Came out in 2009 with Sam Rockwell, and Kevin Spacey did like the voice of like the AI in it.
I feel like I've heard of this movie, but I don't think I've seen it.
Yeah, it's about this guy that's like alone on this like station on the moon, and they're like harvesting minerals on the moon.
Okay.
And like some weird things start happening, and he like starts kind of trying to investigate what's going on, and then like it really gets interesting. And yeah, it's I won't really get into like anything beyond that, because it's one of those movies where like it's better if you don't know a whole lot going in. But yeah, it's really good. It's very interesting. Well, Sam Rockwell's really good in it. Yeah, it's another one I would recommend. I do like like I do like Elysium, the Neil Blomkamp movie with Matt Damon.
I don't think I ever saw that one.
I like it, probably like more than the consensus, but also like it doesn't do a whole lot in space. Like it technically would probably qualify, but I was trying to stick to movies that were like in space way more than, which I guess the Apollo 11 documentary, like the majority of it like isn't necessarily in space, but it was worth it for with drafting. And then of course, you have a lot of Star Wars and Marvel movies, but I wasn't interested in drafting those.
Like Europa or like Red Planet.
I haven't seen those.
Have you seen those?
No.
Yeah. I think it's, again, it's, my memory's a bit vague, but Europa, I think, is one of those like blast the ship off.
Yeah.
And, last ditch effort kind of thing to like go track down something, and it's things go wrong, and and then I think it's called Red Planet, where like they're trying to, it's like a rescue mission to Mars or something, and another, a lot of these I think are somewhat similar Armageddon. As far as there you go.
That's a fun one, I guess. Bruce Willis. There was
anytime we can nuke an asteroid, I feel like that's always a good.
Yeah. Which is funny. Like I was thinking about how like I watched Sunshine recently. And it's funny because in that movie, Cillian Murphy is like the scientist delivering this bomb to the sun. And it's like, oh, and now he's another scientist delivering some bombs in Oppenheimer. It's just kind of irony.
Career foreshadowing.
Yeah, for real. I did like, did you see First Man with Ryan Gosling? I thought it was pretty good. I enjoyed that one. It's like a more personal look at Neil Armstrong, basically.
Okay. Maybe
it was directed by Damien Chazelle.
I think I did see it.
Whiplash and La La Land.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. It's not my favorite, but I thought it was a good movie. Avatar, obviously.
Europa Report is a...
Europa Report. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to check that out. Avatar, obviously, they're in space.
Yeah.
But, I'm not the biggest fan of those. Have you ever seen the really old, let's see what it is, 1902, A Trip to the Moon? Have you ever watched that?
I don't think so.
It's like this 15-minute 1902 movie about like these scientists that decide to go to the moon, and then like it kind of gets chaotic for a minute when some aliens show up.
Of course they do.
Yeah. And it's actually like you can go on I think it's on HBO Max. Yeah. They actually, so the guy that made this movie, his name is, I think I want to say French movie, George Méliès. I don't know how to say his last name. But he
drop off all the consonants.
Yeah. When you watch the movie, like if you go on HBO Max and watch it, it's like it's colorized. And you're like, how is this 1902 movie colorized? Well, oh man, I just bumped my mic. He actually like went in frame by frame and like colored the film, I guess. Like I was reading about it because I was thrown off when I started watching it. And I was like, how is this in color? Like, this is weird. Just because I knew that it came out in 1902. And so I researched it, and sure enough, like he went in and like colorized a lot of the film, and they found and like restored those colored versions of it. So it's really cool. It's it's made in 1902. It's silent but it's kind of funny and interesting in a way.
What were they theorizing about the moon?
Yeah, it's worth 15 minutes of viewing. A fun little trip back in history. yeah, I don't really have any more. I guess I should shout out my mother-in-law loves the movie Passengers. I did not like that movie, but
okay, I don't think I saw that one.
Shout it out for my mother-in-law who loved the movie Passengers with Chris Evans and Jennifer Lawrence.
Classic.
Dune. We didn't even mention Dune in honorable mentions yet, but Dune is very good. Did you see the newer one?
Yeah, I did. I liked it.
Have you seen the 80s David Lynch version?
I haven't.
I'll shout out it too, but not because it's good, but because it's one of those like fun bad movies where like you watch it and you're that was terrible, but I'm glad I watched it sort of movie.
Yeah, I've seen clips of it, so yeah, I get the gist of how great it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I watched it a while back and I was like, man, was that bad, but man, was it fun at the same time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's pretty much covers all the space movies I can think of to recommend. Yeah, I don't see any more on my list. Yeah, that was a good draft. I'll read back our results. I ended up with Ad Astra, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Alien, Apollo 11, and Sunshine. And Sam ended up with Interstellar, Apollo 13, The Martian, WALL-E, and Solaris. Yeah, both really good lists.
Yeah.
If anything, I think like you might run away with it by having WALL-E and Apollo 13, which people love both of those movies.
Yeah.
Rightly so,
Fan favorites.
So we'll see, I guess. But yeah, that's our movie draft. Did you have anything for recommendation of the week?
I'll recommend an album that just came out.
Okay.
For your listening pleasure by Glenn Hansard. It's called All That Was East Is West of Me Now, which just by the title, I think is one of the best. And there's a song on there called All That's East Is West of Me Now.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I've been a big fan of Glenn. I actually saw the Swell season. They kind of did a reunion tour this year. Ooh. And I got to see them in Atlanta, which was great.
Yeah, that's really cool.
That album just came out this month, I think, or October.
Yeah. I want to say, so I have never seen the movie once, which is what like started the Swell season.
Right.
But I have seen another film by that director. His name is John Carney.
Yeah.
I've seen Sing Street, which I love, but he actually just came out with a new movie that's on Apple TV, I think, called Floor in the Sun, that I'd like to check out.
Cool.
And I need to check out Once too. Have you ever seen Once?
Yeah, I have. I really like it. Like, I think it's a great movie.
Yeah, I want to check it out too.
Super low budget, but I just think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I've listened to obviously the soundtrack a lot.
Yeah, the soundtrack is good.
Yeah, and the Swell season, it's great.
Yeah,
but yeah,
and he's done a lot of solo stuff since then, and he was with the Frames before the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, right. He's a fantastic.
I've listened
artist,
to some of his solo stuff, and it's really, really good. So yeah, I'll have to check that out for sure.
Glenn Hansard. And there's a document. I forget the name of the document. I'll have to look it up for you, but there's a documentary of like him and a couple of other like Irish artists that do the Santiago Camino sailing trail from like Ireland down to Spain, I think.
Okay.
And they document it, and they're just like singing songs and doing paintings and poetry the whole way down, and like it's a really cool documentary.
Nice.
But what about you?
I feel like I had said something earlier in the episode that I might use for recommendation, but I can't even remember what it was. I should have written it down.
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh well, yeah, I'm totally winging it. But I am going to recommend I remember what it was. The Team Deacons podcast.
Oh yeah.
It's
I've already got that written down.
Yeah, it's a really fun podcast. I haven't listened to it a ton. I've just kind of listened to episodes here and there. When I've been doing like research for this series, there's been a few, like they had like Chris Corbold on, who's done special effects work with Nolan. Hoyte van Hoytema has an episode with them. His episode is really fun, really interesting.
I bet he's done some like a ton of huge movies.
Oh yeah, so, it's fun to hear him talk. So yeah, I recommend that podcast. It's an interesting listen, and you can kind of like pick and choose like people here. And usually when like if you look at the show description, even if you don't recognize the person's name, which a lot of times you might not, because it's like it's not directors, it's like kind of the people that make the directors look great. And but if you go in there, it'll usually have like a few movies that they've been a part of, like a few of their biggest movies. So you can like kind of click on the episode and be like, oh, they did these movies, and then you're like, okay, I'll listen. You know, it's that sort of thing. But yeah, cool. It's a cool podcast. I recommend it. Yeah, that's I think that's pretty much it. Sam, it's been great having you on. Would you do you want to plug some places here at the end to either follow you or the Collision or whatever you want to plug?
Yeah, I'll plug the Collision because I can plug myself, but you'd probably be bored. And I don't do a ton of social media anyways. But the collision.org. We write about pop culture, and that includes movies. We also do reviews of movies in video form over on the Collision BMI YouTube channel. And so you can check that out. We've got Instagram and everything as well. But the collision.org, kind of where all that resides, and just kind of just diving into pop culture stuff and arts and culture and Christianity. So
it's some good stuff too. That's where you can find the Collision and some of the work that Sam and Daniel do over there. So that's all we have for this week. I'm looking forward to the Dunkirk episode next week. But that is all for now. I'm Eli Price for Sam Camp. You've been listening to The Establishing Shot. We will see you next time.
Thank you so much for joining us on The Establishing Shot today. We hope you enjoyed the episode and got a lot out of it. Make sure before you go to like and subscribe on all your podcast platforms, and especially on Spotify and Apple. If you could leave a rating and review, that would greatly help the visibility of the podcast, and I would greatly appreciate it. Again, if you go to establishingshotpod.com, you can find out all you need to know about the show, where to find us on the social media platforms, where to find us podcast-wise, YouTube, and you can even leave a voicemail there on the website on the right side of your screen. So click that if you want to give a comment or ask a question about the show. Just feel free to leave a voicemail. We'd be happy to feature that on the show. And also, if you just want to email rather than leave a voicemail, you can email us at establishingshotpod@gmail.com, and we would be happy to answer your question there or feature a question or comment on the show if it pertains to the episodes. So please do that, and we would love for you to join the Establishing Shot family. You can, again, find where to do that on the donate page at establishingshotpod.com. We hope you have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.